Right, but she was also a useless politician. She got the job as President of the Commission because Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, couldn't stand her. She was the Defence Minister in Germany. Do you remember the military parade when the German soldiers had broomsticks instead of rifles because the German army had been so depleted on
the
her
British
watch?
Army, we dream of broomsticks.
Well, yeah,
we should be so lucky.
But that's fact. She got the job by default.
Well,
and that's
it was also
because
the AfD was surging at the time, and it was to do the internal balance.
And have you been surprised by how useless she's been at the job, Stephen, your old mate?
No, we were never actually mates.
Oh.
That was his fantasy, along with the lederhosen, by the sounds of it.
Yes.
Dawn, as we're building up to PMQ, so we're just waiting for the Prime Minister to
You see, Steve McCabe's just been made a Shadow Minister.
I did.
Yeah.
He's often on this programme. He's Shadow Minister for Veterans.
Well, he also made an extremely good contribution to this when he got monstered at his advice surgery, and he was talking about these people from, sort of the... from the river to the sea and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he made the very important point that hadn't been made strongly enough, that people, vulnerable, worried, troubled people, were coming to his advice surgery for his assistance from there, and they had to go through a baying mob, shrieking through megaphones at him. And there's also the issue of his staff. And he said quite rightly, it's not about me, politicians have got thick skins, but my staff and my constituents should not have to put up with it.
No,
the police did...
Nothing?
Exactly.
Well, we had Brendan Cox on the show yesterday, of course, the widower of Jo Cox, the MP who lost her life, Dawn. And actually, Brendan was saying that he still thinks that in our liberal Western democracy we should have freedom to visit our MPs, and he wouldn't want to see any kind of draconian security measures to compromise
and we
that.
should, because we live in a democracy. But the thing is now, Bev, everything is so heightened and so divisive, and people have lost the plot with how to treat people in general, let alone politicians. We feel politicians now are fair game. We can go and say and do what we want to them. And I think so, and I've been guilty in the past, I must admit, some of the rhetoric we use about politicians after, obviously, Jo Cox and David Amess, I think is scary, and I think we do need to dial it down.
Yeah, and the vast majority, 99% of them, are good, hard-working.
Well, look at Stephen Timms, one of the most decent people in British politics.
MP in East Ham, isn't he?
Obviously, it's PPS for a long time, and somebody comes into his surgery and stabs him. I mean, early on, when I first got elected, I was very fond of Armenia. I'd visit Armenia a lot, and a Turkish constituent who objected just came in and punched me, just literally walked up to the desk in my surgery in the Greenford Hall. I mean, I lamped him.
I'm glad you did.
And next thing I know, I having to explain myself to the police. That's self-defence.
If you did that now, you'd be the one who'd be arrested.
Oh, without a shadow.
But you know what? Going back to the story we were talking about earlier on with Have I Got News to You and Gus Khan and the jokes he makes about politicians, I think that's another reason.
Again, that advances the dial.
About giving the job to someone like him.
Quite right, Dawn. Quite right.
Yeah.
But I mean, what's Ian Hislop going to think about that? I mean, it just makes you... what are the other... And who are the guests?
Well, as I say, I think all of us would think if we were meant to be on that panelist, we'd pull out.
I would think long and hard about it, I must admit. You hope they do the fair thing and they give someone who is more on the pro-Israel side a place on that panel as well.
Yeah, they have to, but it's not really
to.
Right, here's a Prime Minister.
He's on his feet.
Yeah. Is he standing up? I can't tell.
Gavin Newlands. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Last year, Scotland exported 19 trillion watt-hours of electricity worth £4 billion to the UK grid. Yet not only do Scottish generators pay the highest grid connection charges in Europe, Scots pay amongst the highest standing charges, whilst London is by far the lowest. Our heating and lighting is switched on a lot earlier and off a lot later than the south of England. So should Scottish households be forced to shiver in the dark this winter to subsidise the richest part of the UK?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr Speaker, as the honourable member will know, standing charges are a matter for Ofgem, the independent regulator. Last week they did launch a consultation asking for views about standing charges, and he'll know, because of geographic factors, the UK government already provides an annual cross-subsidy worth £60 to a typical household in Scotland. But on top of that, we are providing considerable support to everyone across the UK with their energy bills this year.
Smith. Mr Speaker, Abigail Moore-Eden is 4 years old. Released from Hamas captivity last weekend, Abigail is an orphan after her parents were brutally executed in front of her during Hamas's rampage on the 7th of October. To secure the freedom of Abigail and some other hostages, Israel is taking a huge risk releasing convicted terrorists, including would-be suicide bomber Isra Jabis, imprisoned for detonating a gas cylinder in her car in 2015. Hamas also seemed to have broken the ceasefire, activating 3 explosive devices. So what steps is my rightable friend the Prime Minister taking to continue his welcome, steadfast support for Israel in its fight not only against Hamas, but other Iran-backed terror groups?
Prime Minister. Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising such an important issue in my House, and my thoughts, and I know the thoughts of the whole House will be with Abigail. As I've said before, we support Israel's right to defend itself, to go after Hamas and to free hostages, to deter further incursions and to strengthen its security for the long term. We welcome, though, the extension to the agreement to pause fighting, increase humanitarian aid and release further hostages. Negotiations are ongoing and highly sensitive, but this has been a welcome first positive step. We will continue also to hold Iran to account, Mr. Speaker, for any further escalation from these groups, as well as continuing to work with partners to disrupt and deter Iran's destabilising activities in the Middle East.
I now call on the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In an effort to hide from his failures, the Prime Minister spent this week arguing about an ancient relic that only a tiny minority of the British public have any interest in. Mr. Speaker, that's enough about the Tory party. In 2019, they all promised the country that they would control immigration, numbers will come down, the British people will be in control. How's it going?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be crystal clear. The levels of migration are far too high, and I'm determined to bring them back down to sustainable levels. That's why we've asked the Migration Advisory Council to review certain elements of the system. We're reviewing those findings and we'll bring forward next steps. But earlier this year, we announced the toughest action ever taken to reduce legal migration. The effects of that action are yet to be felt, but will impact 150,000 student dependents, and forecasts show that migration is likely to drop as a result. But all we've heard up until this moment from the Honourable Gentleman on this topic is a secret backroom deal with the EU that would see an additional 100,000 migrants here every year.
Mr. Speaker, never mind the British Museum, it's the Prime Minister who's obviously lost his marbles. Mr. Speaker, the Greek Prime Minister came to London to meet him, a fellow NATO member, an economic ally, one of our most important partners in tackling illegal immigration. But instead of using that meeting to discuss those serious issues, he tried to humiliate him and cancelled at the last minute. Why such small politics, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we're always happy to discuss important topics of substance with our allies, like tackling illegal migration or indeed strengthening our security. But when it was clear that the purpose of a meeting was not to discuss substantive issues for the future, but rather to grandstand and relitigate issues of the past, it wasn't appropriate. But furthermore, when specific commitments and specific assurances on that topic were made to this country and then were broken, it may seem alien to him, but my view is when people make commitments, they should keep them.
Mr. Speaker, I discussed with the Greek Prime Minister the economy, security, immigration. I also told him we wouldn't change the law regarding the marbles. It's not that difficult, Prime Minister. The reality is simple. He has no plan on boat crossings, and migration is at a record high. His policy is that companies can pay workers from abroad 20% less than British workers. That has contributed to those record high immigration levels, hasn't it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about the boat crossings. He's failed to notice illegal boat crossings are down by a third this year, Mr. Speaker, thanks to every one of the actions that we've taken that he opposed every single time they were raised. But look, Mr. Speaker, no one will be surprised that he's backing an EU country over Britain. Just this last week he was asked, he was asked which song best sums up the Labour Party. What did he come up with? Well, Mr. Speaker, he showed his true colours and chose Ode to Joy, literally the anthem of the European Union. And he will back Brussels over Britain every single time.
So let me get this straight. The Prime Minister is now saying that meeting the Prime Minister of Greece is somehow supporting the EU instead of discussing serious issues. He's just got dug further into that hole that he's made for himself. And ever, rather than deal with the facts, he's prosecuting his one-man war on reality. And that reality is stuck. Under this government, a bricklayer from overseas can be paid £2,500 less than somebody who's already here. A plasterer, £3,000 less. An engineer, £6,000 less. The list goes on. It's absurd. Labour would scrap his perverse wage-cutting policy. Why won't he?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have taken significant measures and will bring forward more. And indeed, as the ONS themselves said, more recent estimates indicate a slowing of immigration as a result of the things that we're doing. But I am surprised, Mr. Speaker, to hear him now taking this new position, because I've got a quote here from a pushy young shadow immigration minister who said, and I directly quote this person, he told this House that limits on skilled migrants are, and I quote, a form of economic vandalism. Who could possibly have taken such a bizarre position to only then U-turn? It will come as no surprise to anybody that it was him.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that's lost control of the borders, and they're sitting right there. And this is a government not just in turmoil, in open revolt. The Immigration Minister thinks the Prime Minister is failing because apparently nobody will listen to his secret plan. The former Home Secretary thinks he's failing because of his magical thinking. The current Home Secretary thinks he's failing. He even took time out of his busy schedule insulting people in the North East to admit he agrees with Labour. The Prime Minister seems to be the only person on the Tory benches without his own personal immigration plan. Clearly, his own side don't have any faith in him. Why should the public?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's really a bit rich to hear about this from someone who described all immigration law as racist, who literally said it was a mistake to control immigration. We have taken steps and we will take further steps, which is why recent estimates of immigration show that it's slowing. It's why next year the immigration health surcharge will increase by over 2/3. It's why immigration fees are going up by up to 35%. But, Mr. Speaker, one of his own members of his front bench said that having a target isn't sensible. Right? It's no surprise, Mr. Speaker, to have people like this, because this is the person, Mr. Speaker, while we're taking all these measures that he opposed, this is the person who stood on a platform and promised to defend free movement.
On their watch, migration has just trebled and is giving the House a lecture about targets. He's lost in La La Land. There can be few experiences more haunting for the members opposite than hearing this Prime Minister claim that he's going to sort out a problem. First, he said he'd get the NHS waiting list down. They went up. Unabashed by that, he said he'd get control of immigration. It's gone up. Following that experience, he turned his hand to bringing taxes down. And, would you believe it, the tax burden is now going to be higher than ever. It is ironic that he's suddenly taken such a keen interest in Greek culture when he's clearly become the man with the reverse Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to... maybe the Home Secretary could help me out here. Rubbish. So will the Prime Minister do the country a favour? We'll have to check the tape again, Mr. Speaker, I think. So will the Prime Minister do the country a favour, warn us what he's planning next, so we can prepare ourselves for the disaster that will inevitably follow?
Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the year, we said, Mr. Speaker...
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the year, we said we would halve inflation, and this government has delivered, easing the burden on the cost of living for families everywhere. But we know his plans, Mr. Speaker, all the way through that. What did he do? Back inflationary pay rises. He talked about welfare, no controls for welfare, and borrowing £28 billion a year that would just make the situation worse. He mentioned tax, Mr. Speaker. Just this past week, we've delivered the biggest tax cuts since the 1980s for millions of people and businesses, increased pensions and benefits, and this week secured £30 billion of new investment for this country. So he can keep trying, Mr. Speaker, to talk...
Can I just say to the Shadow Foreign Secretary... order! Just a little bit quieter, please. I want to hear. Right, Manchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has rightly responded to the shocking and unacceptable rise in anti-Semitism, and we saw extra funding in the autumn statement. I note that 44% of religiously aggravated motivated offences last year were against the Muslim community. Yet there was no funding in the autumn statement to deal with Islamophobia. The government's independent advisor role for Islamophobia has been left vacant for over 1 year. The Prime Minister knows we discussed these matters over a year ago, yet no action has taken place. Prime Minister, enough is enough with regards to tackling anti-Muslim hatred. Will the government now finally take action?
Mr. Speaker, we won't tolerate anti-Muslim hatred in any form and expect it to be dealt with wherever it occurs. I actually recently met Tal Mama, a service that provides support to victims of anti-Muslim hatred, who we have, in fact, supported with over £6 million of funding since its inception, and we're in regular dialogue with them. We have also, Mr. Speaker, doubled the funding for protective security measures through the Protective Security for Mosque scheme, and will continue to do everything that we can to keep our Muslim community safe.
Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, in good news for kids this morning, it was snowing in Aberdeen, and when they looked out of the kitchen window, they would have been filled with delight. But for their parents, many of them who looked out the kitchen window this morning would have been filled with dread. Dread knowing that they simply can't afford to pay their energy bills. So in that context, can I ask the Prime Minister, does he regret offering no financial mechanism whatsoever towards families this winter?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that's simply not right to say that there isn't support for families this winter. There's been considerable support this year for energy bills, and this winter, pensioner households, for example, will receive up to £300 alongside their winter fuel payment, because they're some of the most vulnerable households, and it's right that they get that support at a difficult time.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate it's difficult for the Prime Minister to empathise when he quite clearly can't understand. But to be clear to both him and indeed the whole House, this isn't a matter of energy production. Scotland produces 6 times more gas than we consume, and around 2/3 of our electricity already comes from renewable resources. This is a consequence of decades of failed energy policy here in Westminster. Now, those of us on these benches, we believe that Scotland's energy wealth and our energy resource should benefit the people of Scotland. Why doesn't he?
Mr. Speaker, the entire energy grid infrastructure in this country is integrated, which brings benefits to people in every part of our United Kingdom. But when it comes to supporting people with energy bills, Mr. Speaker, that's why earlier this year we increased benefits at the highest rate on record. It's why we've provided cost of living payments worth £900 on top of regular support. And it was right, Mr. Speaker, not to wait till the last moment to give people that support. We gave it to them earlier this year so they would have the security they need going into winter, and as I said, on top of the money for pensioners, and when there are cold snaps, we have cold weather payments that kick in, and the Warmed Homes discount providing an extra £150 to the most vulnerable households. All of that is the most considerable action taken by any government to help people with their energy bills.
The £400 million redevelopment of Kettering General Hospital is the #1 investment priority for local residents. The first part of this is a £50 million new energy plant to power the expanded and improved hospital. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, please do all he can to ensure that the Department of Health gets spades in the ground on time next spring, so that we can get the construction of our redeveloped, much-loved local hospital fully underway?
Oh, can I thank my honourable friend for continuing to champion the new hospital in Kettering. We're absolutely committed to delivering the scheme for Kettering General Hospital, and as my honourable friend will be aware, the new energy centre...
Well, as we're talking about Kettering Hospital, let's revisit some of those initial arguments that Keir Starmer made, going in on immigration, first of all. Emily, that was a strong and bold move from the Labour leader.
Very interesting indeed to see the Labour Party go so strong on migration. They're telling him essentially to ditch this shortage occupation policy that we have in place, which allows businesses to essentially undercut wages, undercut British workers when they receive foreign workers
and
instead.
Yet, Rishi Sunak had some quotes from the Labour leader to bring up not ancient history, but from when Keir Starmer was shadow migration minister, and when he suggested it would be an act of economic vandalism to have any limits on skilled immigration. Now, a lot of these quotes from Keir Starmer come from, decades ago when he was a young, radical individual. This came from when he was a shadow minister.
Yes, I mean, the question for the public right now, when we know a large portion of the public care deeply about immigration and believe it is too high, is who do you trust? Do you trust? Keir Starmer's certainly trying to set out his stall that he is the man to cut immigration. Question is, do you believe him?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, Rishi Sunak was saying 100,000 more migrants under Labour, although the Labour leader said Rishi Sunak has lost his marbles. Let's dive back in to hear what's going on in the chamber.
A reprioritisation, but that was the appropriate thing to do to ensure safety. But all patients and staff are already benefiting from some of the improvements that we've made, which comes on top of the largest capital programme for the NHS in its history, rolling out community diagnostic centres, urgent treatment centres and surgical hubs right across the country.
Sarah Dines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As disturbed as I was to learn that British politicians are being debanked by the National Westminster Bank, you can imagine my horror to find that an entire town, Bakewell in Derbyshire Dales, is being debanked by the National Westminster Bank. And in the whole of Derbyshire Dales and the Peak District, there's not a bank left. Can you share my concern, please? Will my right honourable friend share my concern that as we are the major shareholder, that the National Westminster Bank are ignoring my vulnerable, elderly people and also my businessmen? It's a big, thriving market town.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right that all customers, wherever they live, should have appropriate access to banking and cash services, which is why we've legislated to protect access to cash, and the FCA has issued guidance which seeks to ensure that branch closure decisions treat customers fairly. I know there's been an assessment about access to cash in her area, and the financial services sector will provide a new cash deposit service for her community, and also everyone can access the post office for regular banking services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Cancer Research's UK manifesto, Longer, Better Lives, set out a roadmap to save 20,000 lives a year by 2040. Research is key to this, and they've identified a funding gap of over £1 billion. Cancer Research UK have told me that excluding research funded by industries, charities fund 62% of cancer research compared to the government's 38%. Is the Prime Minister ashamed of this, and what is he going to do to address this gap?
Mr. Speaker, Of course, the government must do more to continue preventing cancer deaths in our country. That's why we're focused on fighting cancer on all fronts: prevention, diagnosis, treatment, research and funding. Crucially, cancer is now being diagnosed at an earlier stage more often, with survival rates improving across all types of cancer, including the most common cancers. And through our treatment record, we are rolling out community diagnostic centres everywhere to ensure that we can reach those people as quickly as possible.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank you on behalf of the all-party group on HIV/AIDS for hosting today's reception to honour the incredible contribution that Sir Elton John has made to the fight against AIDS. I very much welcome today's announcement of further funding for HIV, hepatitis B and C opt-out testing in hospital emergency departments as a critical step in fighting these diseases, and ask the Prime Minister to join with me, and indeed I'm sure the whole House, in praising Sir Elton and his AIDS Foundation for pioneering this work.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Sir Elton John has been a powerful voice for change in the UK and the world, and through the brilliant work of his foundation, he's raised awareness of HIV, reduced stigma and saved lives, and I'm very pleased that this will be celebrated tonight at the HIV all-party group event. And ahead of World AIDS Day on Friday, I'd also like to reaffirm this government's commitment to ending new transmissions within England by 2030. And I know my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will have more to say about the expansion of our recent pilot initiative on screening at tonight's event.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pearl Melody Black was 22 months old when a car rolled off a private drive onto a highway and hit a wall that fell and killed her while she was holding her daddy's hand. The parents, my constituents Gemma and Paul, South Wales Police and the CPS were all frustrated that no charges could be brought in the case due to a loophole in the law. My 10-minute rule bill sought to amend the 1988 Road Traffic Act, but that fell as it didn't get parliamentary time. I know that colleagues across the House have similar issues, so can I ask the Prime Minister would he meet with me and my constituents to assist in finding a way forward?
I'm incredibly sorry to hear about Pearl, and my thoughts, I know the whole House's thoughts will be with Gemma and Paul. I will make sure that the honourable member gets a meeting with the relevant minister on the legislation as quickly as possible.
Nikki Aiken.
Speaker, now we know that the Labour Party has an aversion to white band man, but does the Prime Minister share my concerns that according to a Daily Telegraph report today, that Labour-run Westminster Council is increasing parking charges for electric small vehicles by up to 1,800%, demonstrating that it doesn't support small businesses nor tackling climate change.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise these concerns, and it seems that Labour in London are yet again penalising hard-working people. First we had ULEZ, and now it seems they're hiking parking charges on white van drivers and small businesses, and I join my honourable friend in urging the Labour-run Westminster Council to rethink these damaging proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I quote, "Rishi thinks, just let people die and that's okay." This was reportedly the view of the Prime Minister of COVID during late 2020, as recorded by the then Chief Scientific Advisor in his diary. This came to light last week in the COVID inquiry, and I was shocked that Downing Street didn't categorically deny it. So could I ask the Prime Minister today, how is it that people who were closest to this issue, who he worked with day in, day out, at the top of government, how on earth did these people get the impression that the Prime Minister was okay with people in our country dying?
Minister, I think he's got the question. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable lady knows, there is an ongoing inquiry into COVID, and it's right that that process followed, and I look forward to providing my own evidence. But if she had taken the time to actually read the evidence submitted to the inquiry, she will have seen that the person she mentioned, the Chief Science Advisor, confirmed that he did not hear me say that, and that's because I didn't.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That 1.3 million migrants over a period of 2 years is a catastrophe for Britain is obvious to everyone apart from guilt-ridden bourgeois liberals and greed-driven globalists.
Yeah.
So, given that the same kind of people are stymieing the Prime Minister's Stop the Boats campaign, will he bring urgent measures forward to deal with legal migration? And in terms of the bill that he's promised, will he ensure it is exactly in the form recommended by his own immigration minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to have the honourable gentleman's advice and support as in all our measures to tackle both legal and illegal migration. As I said, we are reviewing the recommendations of the MAC and will be bringing forward measures on top of the very significant restrictions that we've already announced on student dependence. And when it comes to stopping illegal migration, I've been crystal clear. We will bring forward legislation that makes it unequivocally the case that Rwanda is safe, and there will be no more ability of our domestic courts to block flights to Rwanda, and that's what our legislation will ensure.
Melissa McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In response to my friend for Stockton North last week, the Prime Minister claimed that the best way to stop children living in poverty is for them to have parents who work. But, Mr. Speaker, over 70% of poor children already live in a home where someone goes out to work. So I'll give him another chance. Can he explain why reports say that 1 million of our children in 2022 experienced not just poverty, but destitution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, no child should grow up in poverty, and that's why I'm pleased that because of the measures we've taken, 1.7 million fewer people are living in poverty today than in 2010. I'd also say to the Honourable Lady that it is absolutely crystal clear that for children growing up in workless households are 4 or 5 times less likely to be in poverty. That's what the facts say. That's why our efforts are on getting people into work and making sure that work pays, which is why the actions in the autumn statement to raise the national living wage to record levels and provide a significant tax cut will do an extraordinary amount to continue lifting children out of poverty.
Jeremy Wright.
Speaker, and can I thank you for welcoming my constituent John Farringdon to Parliament this morning. At 110 years of age, John is among my more experienced constituents, and I know he would want me to ask the Prime Minister to join us in thanking the staff of Covington Mill Care Home for looking after him so well. But can I also ask my right honourable friend, when John comes to Downing Street this afternoon, to try and find a moment or two to speak to him? It may be a useful conversation for those obsessed with the opinion polls, as I think it's fair to say John has some experience at surviving against the odds.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and I very much hope I have a chance to meet John later on. And can I join with my honourable friend in paying tribute to his care home for the incredible care that they provide him. It's great that he's here, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy meeting him later today.
Sir Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister may already be aware from his colleagues of the exceptional contribution my constituent, Dr. Hadura, has made during a 30-year career in our health service. He may also be aware that for the last 6 or 8 weeks she's been frantic with worry about her 83-year-old mum who is trapped in Palestine with a number of family members with no way out. Will he agree to work with the Foreign Office and the Home Office during this time of some hope in the Middle East to find an urgent way to get vulnerable people, such as Dr. Hadura's mum, out of danger into a safe place of refuge while we can? Because once the ceasefire ends, so tragically will the chance of survival of too many people in Palestine.
Well, can I start by paying tribute to the honourable gentleman's constituent's long service in the health service, I think he mentioned, and can assure him that we're doing absolutely everything we can to ensure the safe passage of British nationals out of Gaza. I will ensure that the Department of Foreign Office get in touch with him. All British nationals that have been registered already with the Foreign Office have had significant interaction. We have successfully ensured the safe passage of well over 200 already, but we'll continue to do everything we can for those that are remaining, and I'll make sure that we're in touch with him and his constituent.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Thanks to this Conservative government, the Alex Hospital in Redditch has received nearly £19 million of investment, and we are boosting training places at the Three Counties Medical School. So does the Prime Minister agree with me it's the perfect time to back my campaign to bring back services so that women, local mums, can once again give birth in their hometown and all children can be seen at the hospital no matter what illness they are experiencing?
Well, I know that my honourable friend campaigns passionately for the delivery of first-class healthcare for her constituents, and like her, I welcome the investment that the Alexandra Hospital has had in recent years in a whole range of different services. She will know that the reconfiguration of services are, of course, clinically led local decisions following the appropriate engagement with patients and stakeholders, but I know that my honourable friend will continue to make her case on behalf of her community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In June, the Canadian Prime Minister claimed the Indian government may be linked to the killing of Canadian Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. Now it is reported that the US government thwarted a second assassination attempt of a Canadian-American citizen on US soil. So will the Prime Minister reassure my Sikh constituents who have raised their safety concerns with me that this government is taking this matter very seriously and will raise their concern with his counterpart in India?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already made statements on this matter, but also crucially, of course, we ensure the safety of all communities in our country. That is the first duty of government, and we'll continue to do that, not just for the Sikh community, but every community here in the UK.
John Burrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With both the OBR and ONS confirming that the British economy is now substantially larger than they estimated even a few months ago, does my right honourable friend agree that the economy has once again proven the detractors wrong, and will he do all he can to ensure that we retain record employment, because unemployment is a corrosive social evil?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. A year ago, not just the OBR, but the Bank of England, the IMF and the OECD were all predicting that we would fall into a recession this year. But thanks to the actions of this government and this Chancellor, we have actually grown the economy. You've seen that momentum carry on just in the past week with the announcement of Nissan, record investment in the new plant in Sunderland, safeguarding the future of thousands of jobs in the North East and ensuring the transition to electric vehicles, but also the summit that we hosted attracting £30 billion of new investment into the UK, which, as he said, crucially will support thousands and thousands of jobs in our country.
Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 2,500 disused coal tips in Wales. Welsh Government previously asked the Treasury for £600 million to make them safe, and ahead of the autumn statement, it sought an initial £20 million. But this Tory government provided nothing. Rhondda Cynon Taf has the most high-risk coal tips of any local authority, and the spectre of Aberfan looms large over our communities. So can I ask the Prime Minister, does he think it right the UK took the economic benefit from Welsh coal but won't fund the safety of its legacy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what the UK government is doing is actually investing in Wales, record investment in North Wales electrification on the line, record investment in communities up and down the country. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, to recognise that just recently, the UK government has invested hundreds of millions of pounds to safeguard thousands of jobs at Tata Steel, right? And, Mr. Speaker, the Welsh government does have access to the largest set of Barnett consequentials on record over the past couple of years and have the resources they need.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to this Conservative government, the people of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torque will see over £200 million to fix our broken roads, the reopening of the Stoke-to-Leek line, and secured over £30 million to bus back better by introducing fairer fares and smarter routes to better connect our communities. However, residents who have a free bus pass are being denied using it before 9:30 a.m. by the Labour-run Stoke-on-Trent City Council, meaning that people can't get to their GP appointment or to work. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to end this unfair policy being imposed upon my residents?
Yeah, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of high-quality bus services. That's why we have capped the cost of travelling on buses to £2 until the end of 2024 as a result of our decision on HS2, and also support councils with £1 billion of funding. I would urge all councils to ensure people see the benefits of that investment and wholeheartedly back his campaign.
Deirdre Brett.
Mr. Speaker, NHS England has awarded £330 million to Palantir, a controversial technology firm, to help it recover from its pandemic backlog, despite deep concerns among many healthcare professionals about privacy, ethics and the safety of patient data. In light of the government's recently commissioned report on unifying health data in the UK, can the Prime Minister confirm that no attempts will be made to force the Scottish Government to release the personal data of Scottish residents to any centralised system?
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady knows, healthcare is devolved, but we will look for every opportunity to improve patient care and reduce waiting lists in England, and that's what we're doing, developing new technology which has had a proven track record in bringing down waiting lists and improving the optimisation and efficiency of how theatres are scheduled. That's the type of thing that we need to do to ensure patients get the care they need and we can get efficiency in the NHS.
Final questions, Robert Betland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The increasing proliferation of AI-generated disinformation and deepfake poses a clear and present danger not only to our democratic process, but to the administration of justice itself. What further steps will my right honourable friend take following the Bletchley summit to strengthen our domestic law when it comes to this threat to democracy, and take international action to provide the guardrails that I believe are essential if we are to maintain integrity in the administration of justice?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for all the work he's done in this incredibly important area. He's right that we need to have guardrails around the successful exploitation of this technology, which is why the Online Safety Bill gives the regulators significant new powers to regulate the content on social media companies, including some of the ones that he mentioned. But we're also working internationally, following up from the summit, to ensure that we can all get the benefits of this technology, but in the process safeguard our democracy, which is so crucial to the functioning of our country.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
And as Prime Minister's questions concludes there, let's reflect on some of the big themes that we heard, not just from the Prime Minister, but the Leader of the Opposition and many others too. The opening question, of course, lay on that thorny issue of migration, perhaps a bold move for the Labour Party to pursue. However, of course, it is a particular area of weakness for the government at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say Rishi Sunak took a bit of a grilling on immigration. Keir Starmer setting out a divide, actually, on quite a key migration policy. On this issue of visas to foreign workers, companies are allowed to hire foreign workers on 20% less than the going rate. So the argument there is that you're undercutting British workers quite considerably.
And yet the Prime Minister accused the Leader of the Opposition of flip-flopping on this issue, bringing up a quote from only a couple of years ago when Sir Keir Starmer said that it was an act of economic vandalism to have any limits on skilled migration at all. That's when he was Shadow Migration Minister.
Did he not also say that Keir Starmer saw immigration law or certain immigration laws as racist?
He did, although that quote, to be fair, comes from rather a longer time ago, whereas the quote on skilled migration was from his time as a Shadow Minister.
Right, so immigration. Shall we speak to our two MPs we've got with us for our MP panel? Scott Benton, MP, Blackpool South, and we have Steve McCabe, Birmingham Selly Oak. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Scott, Rishi Sunak, he had a bit of trouble there. He had to bat off rather a few jokes about the diplomatic row with the Greek Prime Minister over the Elgin marbles. And Keir Starmer has a point when he says Rishi Sunak has not controlled immigration. In fact, it's risen very sharply.
Rishi certainly seemed on the back foot today, given the events over the last few weeks. I think there were quite a few open goals for Keir Starmer to exploit. Very interesting to see Labour lead on immigration. This is still an issue in the Red Wall, including in Blackpool, where Labour's legacy of open borders for 13 years and their support for free movement of people and unlimited immigration from the EU is still pretty toxic in Blackpool. But fascinating to see, because of the government's recent troubles on this issue, Labour potentially think they have a reason to exploit those and potentially push the Conservatives in this area. Let's be honest, the government haven't helped themselves, not just on our inability to stop the small boats, but on those catastrophic figures over the last few weeks. And clearly, the government do need to do more on this issue. Robert Jenrick in the Commons yesterday spoke about a comprehensive plan coming forward. I spoke in the Commons. Well, we need to see that plan sooner rather than later, because if we don't reduce not just net migration but stop the boats as well, then I'm afraid we're going to have an extremely difficult time at the next general election.
And Steve McCabe, you have joined the front bench, now Shadow Veterans Minister. Congratulations, by the way. But now that you're part of Sir Keir Starmer's top team, part bound by that level of collective responsibility, is it really the Labour Party's ambition now to make an issue of migration? Is it something the Labour Party feels that it can now be on the front foot on?
Well, I think it's our ambition to demonstrate what's wrong with the things that Rishi Sunak is saying. He's doing nothing to address the skills gap. He's doing nothing to address the demand for skilled workers. And in fact, he's undercutting workers in this country by allowing this 20% discount in wages. So I think Keir was doing exactly what the public would expect a leader of the opposition to do. He was poking fun at a hapless Prime Minister and scoring with some really good zingers.
There was a particularly, perhaps childish zinger from the leader of the opposition, talking about the Prime Minister's reverse Midas touch. Now, anyone who knows what the Midas touch is in Greek mythology, turning things to gold, well, Sir Keir Starmer suggested that the Prime Minister, when he touches things, well, you could look to the Home Secretary for that word, and he, of course, has been accused of unparliamentary language. Steve McCabe, was that an appropriate joke?
Well, I'm not going to comment on what the Home Secretary says. I think he's in enough trouble at the moment. Look, I think all he was doing was what, actually, to be perfectly honest, what Tory backbench MPs are saying in the tea rooms around the Commons. You know, Keir was pointing out that people are very sceptical about anything the Prime Minister says on the subject of immigration at the moment. I think his other comment was that the last thing he needs is the Prime Minister promising to fix anything, and that is, I'm afraid, absolutely true.
Steve, I must come in there. I'll come back to you, Scott, in just one moment, but must challenge you on that a tad. I'm not sure the public have much trust in the Labour Party either when it comes to immigration. Some may view Keir Starmer's line of questioning here as being opportunistic rather than ideologically meaningful for him.
Well, to be perfectly fair, I think Labour have been saying consistently for a very long time now that we actually need an overall strategy for immigration. We need to process asylum claims. We need to separate that from the legitimate need for immigration in certain areas. We shouldn't focus exclusively on students because they have the best record in returning home after they're granted student visas. And we should concentrate on the skills gap because that's the thing that's driving the demand for immigration. There's a fairly consistent track record of Labour laying out its views on these things, so I don't really accept that, no.
It's interesting, Scott, listening to some of those other topics that came up. Migration obviously dominating, but lots of questions about healthcare as well. Local hospitals and more widely the perceived crisis within the NHS. Is this an issue that affects the whole House?
It is, without a shadow of a doubt. Many of my constituents, Tom, can't access basic NHS dentistry appointments. The waiting lists at Blackpool Hospital for a variety of different cancer treatments are increasing as well. So clearly it will be a key election battleground. The degree to which potentially the NHS drives votes across the country in potentially the Red Wall, for example, is completely different to immigration. But of course, it will be in the top 3 or 4 issues people speak about at the general election. From a government point of view, of course, we should have a very good story to tell on the NHS. NHS funding has increased vastly since 2010, not least helped by the money we are now saving from sending to the European Union. But of course, you can't shut down an entire health system, as we did throughout the pandemic, and then not see the type of problems we are doing at the moment. But clearly, in terms of the ongoing NHS strikes, that is really hindering the government's plan to drive down those waiting lists, which of course was one of the Prime Minister's key 5 pledges last year.
Now, Scott, I can't help but notice on your name tag it says Independent Member of Parliament rather than Conservative. You were elected as a Conservative, but for the last 6 or so months you have not had the Conservative whip. Currently, there is a Parliamentary Standards Commissioner investigation into this sting around suggested willingness to break lobbying rules. Could you enlighten us in terms of how far that investigation is going and what is the very latest in terms of what its conclusion might look like?
You'll appreciate, Tom, because it's a live parliamentary investigation, there's not a great deal I can say to your viewers at this stage. I did release a statement at the time in April when the story broke. That investigation is ongoing at the moment, and naturally I hope that's drawn to a conclusion sooner rather than later. As an individual MP, I'm in the top 5% of contributors in the House of Commons. Since I was elected in 2019, I managed to bring in over £400 million extra for the people of Blackpool over and above what the government had planned to spend in my constituency. So I think I've got a pretty strong record and I will be standing at the next election, but clearly I would hope the investigation draws to a conclusion sooner rather than later.
Well, that's very clear. Scott Benton, thank you very much. And indeed to Steve McCabe, now Shadow Minister, as well as Labour MP. Thank you both for joining us to talk through what was a fairly feisty edition of Prime Minister's Questions this afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Now, I believe we're going to head straight to Catherine Forster, who was watching Prime Minister's Questions live as well. Catherine, you just heard from the 2 MPs there, but what were your key takeaways from what we saw?
Well, I'll come to that in just a sec, but just to say I was struck by Scott Benton, what he said. OK, he's had the whip suspended, but he was a Conservative MP. He hopes to be a Conservative MP again. And generally, you'll always have both sides making the best of it. But he said, you know, the Prime Minister was on the back foot and it was very difficult. And talking about all the divisions within the Conservative Party about immigration. And really, it just felt like Sir Keir Starmer was laughing at Rishi Sunak. I mean, he began on immigration, mentioned how they'd pledged to get it down over and over and over again, and simply said, how's that going? And then, of course, moving on to the Elgin Marvels, saying, why is this small politics? And the Prime Minister was saying, well, if you make a promise, you should keep it, referring to the fact that the Greek PM had said he wouldn't discuss it. But of course, then that goes back to, well, the Conservatives have promised for 13 years to bring immigration down, and it's now at 750,000. So line after line, Sir Keir Starmer said of the PM, he's lost in la-la land. The government's in open revolt. The man with the reverse Midas touch, as you mentioned, everything he touches turns to rubbish. His own side don't have any faith in him. Why should the public? So it really did feel very difficult for Rishi Sunak. Labour openly laughing at him and really picking up on all the divisions on his own side, which we're hearing over and over again. Every day, somebody else has their opinion of what he should do, what they shouldn't do. But really, you know, they are in a big mess over legal migration, and illegal migration not going so well either.
Now, the Prime Minister did try to hit back. It did feel like it was one of these more bolshy sort of exchanges where there were barbs thrown on either side. Clearly a lot of laughter in the chamber as well. One of the issues that Rishi Sunak brought up was Sir Keir Starmer's apparent U-turn on this issue of migration. That quote that I think we've heard for the first time now, that Starmer wanted no limits on skilled migration only a couple of years ago.
Yes, and of course, you know, it's fairly recent that we've seen Labour feeling confident to go after the government on immigration, because traditionally they have been seen as being fairly soft on it. And of course, it was under Tony Blair in the noughties that immigration really started to go up. When the EU was expanded, of course, Tony Blair didn't feel it necessary to bring in any controls with that, like many other countries did. But I think, you know, we've had 13 years, and the Conservatives' record, tens of thousands, they said for many years they'd get it to. In 2019, Boris Johnson said they'd get it under 230,000, and here they are at 750,000. So sure, Labour may not have had a great record, and we don't, of course, know that things would be any different under them, but it does feel at the moment like it's an open goal for them.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster, for giving us the juicy bits there. But we're going to take a little look at the weather just now, and we'll be right back with more analysis.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It will stay dry and clear for many through the rest of the day, but it will be feeling very cold, and as a result there are some snow and ice warnings in force for Thursday morning. We're going to be seeing some snow being brought by this cold front along northeastern coasts through the rest of the day and tomorrow, and then some further rain and potentially snow across the southwest later. So as that rain across the southwest moves northwards and bumps into the colder air, it could start to bring some snow to the high ground of Devon and Cornwall. Snow showers across the northeast as well as Northern Ireland will bring a risk of some icy stretches by Thursday morning. Widely though, it's going to be a very cold start to Thursday, as we could be as low as -8 in rural areas of Scotland and northwest England. So a very cold start to the day, but some sunshine to be had in similar areas where we'll see it through today, parts of Northern Ireland and much of northern and western England. In the south, though, it will stay cloudier with that rain and potentially hill snow persisting through much of the day. There'll be another cold day, temperatures only reaching 4 or 5 degrees for many of us. Across the north, far north of Scotland, it's going to be windy, so it will feel chillier up here. And on Friday morning, it will be another very cold start. We could see some freezing fog across southeastern areas, so that will bring a bit of a murky start. There'll be some more sunshine around on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we could see the temperatures finally starting to rise a little.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Right, a very interesting PMQs we just watched. Lots of analysis coming your way. We're also going to be delving into the latest from that Royal Bombshell book as well. You don't want to miss it.
But also, it's Nigel Farage who is perhaps in the crosshairs of ITV. Will there be a story dropping in the next few hours about alleged racism? And might it not be true?
The plot certainly thickens.
We'll be looking into that and much more after this.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist. And you survived? I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's Wednesday, the 29th of November. There we go. Keir Starmer's migration gamble. The Labour leader demands changes on migration, but after repeated U-turns, will people believe him?
The Dutch version of the new bombshell book has been pulled from shelves after it named the royal at the centre of a racism scandal involving Prince Harry and Meghan's unborn son's skin.
Britain should rejoin the EU to fix Brexit. Those are the words of the Commission President of the EU, who last night said we goofed it up when asked if Britain would ever reverse Brexit.
Freezing fog to engulf Britain. Temperatures are set to plummet to -8 degrees. The country has been placed on alert, with the weather warning expected to last until Tuesday, the 5th of December.
And what a Prime Minister's questions it was. Perhaps the most feisty that we've seen in weeks and weeks. Why? The Labour leader went in on migration.
Yes, it very much was a grilling on immigration. But at this point, I do wonder whether the great British public actually believe a word on either side of the House when it comes to actually getting those figures down, getting those legal migration figures down, let alone the boats.
It's fascinating. Both of these politicians were saying they wanted to see lower migration. However, actions in the past have suggested that perhaps their words don't match those actions.
Yeah, I'd like to know from you at home whether you actually think Keir Starmer did the right thing going on immigration. Do you believe that people will trust him more and his shadow government more when it comes to this thorny issue? I'm not so sure.
And indeed, might it all be a bit, perhaps, overblown? There are, of course, pandemic effects and those refugee effects from Ukraine and Hong Kong. Might it be that we see more normal levels of migration next year anyway?
I'm not sure about that, because I imagine a lot of people don't want us to return to normal levels either, Tom. But let's have a look at the news with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Israel has received a further list of people to be released from Hamas captivity today. The exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners will be the 6th in the extended truce between Israel and Hamas, which is set to expire tomorrow morning. Israel says the truce could be prolonged further, provided terror group Hamas continues to free at least 10 Israeli hostages per day. Israel Defense Forces say the 12 hostages released last night include 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. Spokesperson for the Israeli government, Eylon Levy, says they won't rest until they bring every hostage home.
161 people remain as hostages in the Gaza Strip. That number includes 146 Israelis and 15 foreigners. That doesn't include dual nationals. 126 are men and 35 are women. There are still 4 children under the age of 18, 4 aged 18 to 19, and 10 people aged 75 and older, including the husbands of many of the elderly women who have been released from captivity and now returning home with their husbands still hostages of Hamas.
The Prime Minister has accused his Greek counterpart of trying to grandstand over the possession of the Elgin marbles. Rishi Sunak defended his decision to cancel a planned meeting between the pair at PMQs this afternoon. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis posted his disappointment on social media, saying the Acropolis is where the sculptures belong. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer joked, saying the Prime Minister spent this week arguing about an ancient relic that only a tiny minority of the British public have any interest in. Meanwhile, the pair clashed on their illegal migration views, with Starmer accusing the government's salary disparity as fuel for illegal migrants to come over.
Rather than deal with the facts, he's prosecuting his one-man war on reality. And that reality is stuck. Under this government, a bricklayer from overseas can be paid £2,500 less than somebody who's already here. A plasterer, £3,000 less. An engineer, £6,000 less. The list goes on. It's absurd. Labour would scrap his perverse wage-cutting policy. Why won't he?
Really a bit rich to hear about this from someone who described all immigration law as racist, who literally said it was a mistake to control immigration. We have taken steps and we will take further steps, which is why recent estimates of immigration show that it's slowing. It's why next year the immigration health surcharge will increase by over 2/3. It's why immigration fees are going up by up to 35%.
An inquest has found all 4 teenagers drowned following a car crash in North Wales. The bodies of Javon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wilf Flitchett and Hugo Morris were found in a silver Ford Fiesta on November the 21st. The car they were found in had left the road at Garreg, overturned and was partially submerged in water. The North Wales coroner announced the results of the inquiry in a brief 4-minute hearing. A major search was launched for the A-level students after they failed to return home to Shropshire from an overnight camping trip to the Snowdonia area. Now, Labour has set out measures aimed at protecting small businesses from antisocial behaviour. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says ensuring invoices are paid on time and rolling out town centre police patrols are both important and will be introduced if the party wins the next election. In a GB News exclusive, he told our economics consultant Liam Halligan that the disparity between larger companies and small businesses is growing.
Legitimate concerns about the public sector and how it relates to late payments. So look, we will take that and put that into the plan. What we've fundamentally tried to do, however, is not just say the solution to this is particular targets or rights for smaller businesses, because they will tell us, well, look, you can have the right to enforce contractual terms on a larger business. If that is such an important customer to you, you're not in a position to do that. And that's why what we put forward is this argument around transparency, around having audit committees report on how quickly larger businesses are paying their smaller suppliers, so that we can all see as consumers, as customers, what is exactly going on.
And a controversial new book about the royal family has been pulled from bookshelves in the Netherlands. Endgame has been taken off Dutch shelves amid reports the book names members of the royal monarchy who allegedly asked about the skin colour of Harry and Meghan's son before he was born. The Dutch publisher says an error occurred in the translation and is currently being rectified. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Welcome back. Good afternoon, Britain. Now, some interesting news to bring you. Just breaking now. Michael Gove has halted Sadiq Khan's decision to block the construction of a new stadium for London. Now, regular viewers of the programme may remember on Tuesday when we spoke about the Mayor of London's decision to block the Stratford Sphere, an enormous new development, innovative stadium covered in screens both inside and out that would have brought almost $2 billion of foreign direct investment into London. Well, as of today, Michael Gove has halted Sadiq Khan's pausing of the project. He's considering now whether to call it in, which means it could still be approved.
Well, viewers may also remember that Tom Harwood was rather upset about this all. You were quite emotional about it.
I was.
You said that this is the sort of thing that we should not be saying no to, and this is an example of how our planning system and how our government and bureaucracy get in the way of things that, could improve our economy. However, I would suggest that perhaps this hideous-looking sphere may not be the best thing that we could have in London or anywhere else in the UK for that matter, but it is nice to see Sadiq Khan have an obstacle put in his way.
Well, it's interesting because there was the investment summit earlier this week that was boasting of almost, £29 billion of foreign direct investment.
Yeah.
It could have been 31 if the sphere was approved.
OK, well, there we go. I want to know what our viewers think about this. Do you care about the sphere? Is this an example of Sadiq Khan getting it wrong?
Not just the sphere, but the jobs, the growth, the high-skilled jobs and the investment and the technology that could have been brought to a pretty dilapidated part of East London.
There we go. Perhaps this is a campaign win for Tom.
Well,
Good Afternoon Britain.
We'll see. We'll bring all sides to this debate. But yes, some breaking news there. The Mayor hasn't been able to block this planning application. It may well be called in.
Well, there you go. Now, it was a somewhat bruising Prime Minister's questions for Rishi Sunak. He faced repeated attacks from Sir Keir Starmer on the government's failure to control immigration and the Prime Minister's decision to cancel a meeting with the Greek Prime Minister.
However, the Prime Minister did manage to land a few blows of his own, pointing out the Labour leader's historic pro-mass migration stance.
Shall we speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope? Chris, thank you very much for joining us. What was your assessment there? Who came out on top?
Yeah, I just wonder whether this whole issue of net migration might be the defining issue of the election next year. Certainly one of the top three. I think to hear Sir Keir Starmer said that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is in la-la land over his idea of bringing down net migration. Don't forget the PM, Mr Sunak, fought on behalf of the Tory party with his commitment in 2019 to bring down overall net migration. Well, it's more than trebled since then. In a briefing just now with reporters, I've been asking the PM's press secretary when we might see any sign of any measures to bring down net migration. Will it be by Christmas? They won't give us a timeline. Interesting remarks there from Sir John Hayes to Mr Sunak. He's the chairman of the Common Sense group of Tory MPs, around 60 MPs from the right of the party, supporting Robert Jenrick's idea to lift the base salary threshold to get a visa to come into this country and look at capping dependence in other areas. That got a degree of support from Mr Sunak. He talked about how cracking down on dependence that students bring in may mean that the figure falls by 150,000. But there is real concern on the Tory right about the lack of action. We're nearly 2 weeks after that Rwanda decision by the Supreme Court. That's about illegal migration, not legal migration, but still, it's all in the same pot for many Tory MPs. And this lack of any kind of apparent energy from the government, despite language about it, but no action, is really frustrating. For the Tory party, I'm not sure Mr. Starmer has much, Sir Keir Starmer, forgive me, has much more to say about it. I think his idea is to work more closely with the continent. There's rumours of an idea of taking maybe 100,000 migrants from the EU into the UK as part of having quotas shared around parts of Europe. That is also pretty unpopular, I think, for many of the people who voted to leave the European Union back in 2016. So Starmer is right to have a go at the PM about it, but I'm not sure he's got any answers either.
Now, the Prime Minister also dug in on his decision to not meet the Greek Prime Minister, Mitsotakis, saying that this was an example of the Greek Prime Minister breaking his word and grandstanding over the issue of the Elgin marbles. It was interesting that Sir Keir Starmer referenced meeting the Greek Prime Minister himself.
That's right, he met on Monday, and although the marbles came up slightly, is mainly a conversation about closer working with Greece, a NATO ally, and doing more work on controlling migration in the southern EU border, which, of course, we have similar concerns with our border with the European Union on the south coast of England. Yes, and Starmer said it's small politics not to meet him. In reply, though, Mr. Sunak made clear that they thought that this whole idea of the Elgin marbles wouldn't be relitigated, and it was attacked again and used again in an interview with BBC on Sunday morning, raised again with Sir Keir Starmer, therefore in his rights to call it off. Again, in the briefing post-PMQs, we've heard from aides to the Prime Minister. They think it will be a slippery slope if the deal was done with Elgin marbles, despite George Osborne, the chairman of the British Museum, trying to find one with Greece. Well, they also suggested that if Labour won the election, they could fold on this issue and more treasures could be taken away from the UK, despite being looked after and cared for with taxpayers' money. So it's a small issue. It's an interesting issue, a talking point issue, but it may develop through the coming weeks and again be another issue that they can drive a wedge, the Tories can drive a wedge with Labour on.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope there, our political editor, live from Westminster. May I just quickly say, before we move on, my inbox, our inbox, is being flooded with messages saying that they're with their Team Tom. People want the sphere. You all at home want the sphere.
Well, they see a part of London that is full of skyscrapers and 10 mass transit hubs lit up all day and night anyway, and they see Sadiq Khan's position, which is there's going to be too much light, and they see it for what it is. Well, it's a fraud.
Phil says, having just seen the sphere in Vegas, we have just got to have one. So there you go.
Well, Phil's been to Vegas and seen. I mean, it's a marvel of modern technology. The idea that we'd reject it is ridiculous. So there's one that's been built in Vegas already, and it's not just the sort of silly smiley face that it shows. It shows the moon, it shows the Earth, it's rotating. It can be quite beautiful.
It's delightful. It's delightful. I do like the globe bit there. Now, anyway, the new royal book has been taken off the shelves in the Netherlands following racist remarks.
Well, reports suggest that this book names the person, the royal person, who allegedly expressed concerns about what skin colour Harry and Meghan's son Archie would have.
Yes, so the publicist have put sales of the book on hold over what they call an error, which is currently being rectified. Royal commentator Michael Cole joins us now. Michael, was this an innocent error?
Emily, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Tom. Emily, you asked the right question. It's one thing if it was an innocent error by the Dutch publishers. It's quite another if this was a publicity stunt to sell more copies of this book. Making the charge of racism is pernicious. It's an easy charge to make, and it's extremely difficult to refute because you have to prove a negative, and whether that's a royal person or anybody else, it's a very ugly allegation to make. Let us go back to where this all began a year ago, more than a year ago, that interview of Oprah Winfrey with the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. And Meghan raised the subject with her interviewer. She said that when she was pregnant, somebody within the royal family had said to her husband, Prince Harry, raised the question about the colour of the child that would be born. And she raised that quite gratuitously in that interview. And you might remember that Oprah Winfrey did this rather stagey, what? what? You know, she dropped her jaw. We must remember that both Meghan and Oprah were actresses in their past lives, and that was a little scene they played out. Prince Harry then joined the conversation, and he looked rather unsure of himself, maybe even embarrassed that this had come up. And he said that it had happened, but he would never disclose the person who spoke to him. And he would just remember it. Well, that allegation was made in the first Omid Scobie book, which was called Finding Freedom. And now he's doubled down, and he says that there are two people within the royal circle, whether they're both members of the royal family, we do not know. So one has to wonder, Emily and Tom, whether the law of diminishing returns will kick in soon. And the other question I think we have to ask ourselves is, who is Omid Scobie? Who is he? Well, he's a 42-year-old, born in Wales with an Iranian mother and a Welsh father, brought up in private schools in Oxford, went to study journalism in London, and wrote gossip column pieces about celebrities and royal people for various magazines, most of them I've never heard of. And then he discovered the Sussexes, or perhaps they discovered him.
Well, it's interesting, of course, he would deny acting, sort of actively working with the Sussexes, but there have been allegations that he is really rather close to them. And now, of course, these books in the Netherlands are being recalled, being pulped, as one newspaper put it this morning, pulp fiction, which I thought was a rather amusing way to put it.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to... Oh.
He says, of course, Emily, that he's not the mouthpiece, he's not the megaphone for them, but he sees everything through a Sussex prism. Witness the fact that everybody in the royal family is pretty well castigated, apart from two people. I give you a guess about who the two people who are not castigated.
I think we can guess, Michael. Thank you so much. We're going to have to end it there. Royal commentator Michael Cole on point as ever. Now, ice bomb blast, freezing fog, perhaps a white Christmas on the way.
Well, Yorkshire has already been experiencing some very wintry scenes, as the Met Office is expecting a yellow weather warning will be in place from tomorrow until Friday, with icy patches predicted across the United Kingdom.
Yes, so joining us now is Met Office meteorologist Alex Deacon. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. There have been quite a lot of warnings in the press today. Freezing fog, an ice bomb blast, plummeting -8 degrees across the country. What's the latest?
I'm not quite sure what an ice bomb blast is, but it's definitely got colder. And that's going to continue over the next couple of days. Really chilly nights, so extensive frosts. And yes, we are a bit concerned about ice and in a few places further snow. So it could be a bit slippery on the morning commutes, particularly concerned across parts of eastern England, eastern Scotland, but also the east of Northern Ireland. And where I am, in the southwest, there is the possibility of a little bit of snow tonight. Mostly that's going to be up over Dartmoor, but a few places could wake up to a light covering as we go into tomorrow. So yes, it's turned a lot colder. Most places aren't going to see any snow. Many of us will just be fine and sunny, but cold. But those mornings are going to be frosty. And wherever we see any showers, like you're seeing there across parts of North and East Yorkshire, Eastern Scotland, well, they could have a bit of snow mixed in with them. So those roads are going to be a little bit slippery for the next few mornings.
And this warning is set to last for a few days. Are we expecting, therefore, for things to thaw, to get better in around 5 or 6 days' time?
Well, I don't know about getting better. Some people like the cold, but yeah, the cold spell is definitely set to last, at least until the weekend. There are signs that it will turn a bit milder next week, but it's not clear-cut. It's not sure exactly how long this cold spell is going to last, but certainly it's going to last for the rest of this week. Still pretty chilly into the weekend. We may well see things turning a bit milder next week, but cold certainly for the rest of this week. Widespread morning frosts, and for a little bit of snow.
It was hard to get out of bed this morning because it was very chilly indeed. Just very quickly, are we heading for a white Christmas?
Too early to say on that one, I'm afraid. Looks like it'll turn milder next week. Beyond that, we'll keep you updated.
Oh, excellent. We look forward to seeing it. It's very
always
rare that we
11
get
degrees
one.
and raining.
More often it's a white Easter these days than it is a white Christmas. But Alex Deakin, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we'll be back with you whenever we get more yellow weather warnings.
Well, could Britain be set to head back into the European Union? Well, EU President Ursula von der Leyen thinks this could be a possibility, but what do you think? Should we have ever left? Well, we'll get to what she's actually said and decipher what she meant there.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Is the UK set to head back into the European Union? Well, not that long ago, the man leading the polls, Sir Keir Starmer, said, "We don't want to diverge from EU rules."
The more we share values, the more we share a future together, the less the conflict. And actually, different ways of solving problems become available. You know, actually, we don't want to diverge.
And then last week, the Labour leader said the music that best represents his party is the EU anthem.
The Labour Party, I mean, one of the pieces I've got is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the choral Ode to Joy. That's been hardwired in me for a long, long time. So I would go with that. There are many others that I could associate with the Labour Party, but it's that sense of moving forward to a better place.
A better place. And last night we saw a further piece of the puzzle. The EU President, Ursula von der Leyen, has opened the door to the United Kingdom rejoining.
Speaking of this European Union, do you believe that Britain could ever rejoin this European Union?
That who?
Britain. Who? It's a small country with an ambassador sitting right there. It's a small pirate island off the coast of France. UK. United Kingdom. Could it rejoin the European Union?
Ambassador. So, Ambassador, you know my position. First of all, thanks God, with the Windsor Agreement, we had a new beginning for old friends. Very important. And then I must say, I keep telling my children, you have to fix it. We goofed it up. You have to fix it. So I think here, too, the direction of travel,
Oh, that was worse than I thought.
Yeah, she was talking about her preferred direction of travel there. But interestingly, written into the Brexit deal is the option to renew, revise or terminate this Brexit deal every 5 years.
Yes, so therefore, in 2025, the current deal, the one that was set by Boris Johnson's administration, will expire and negotiations with the European Union will reopen.
That's after the next general election. So could this lead to another government, a different government, taking the country back into the EU?
Let's piece this all together. Joining us now is former Vice President of the European Movement and former leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vince Cable. Thank you very much for joining us. You just watched that clip of Ursula von der Leyen there. It was all laughs, all joking about the United Kingdom, you know, just a little island off the coast of France. Do you think that with this renegotiation of the Brexit deal coming up and potentially with Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister, there is a very real chance that we could end up rejoining the European Union?
Well, I think we could, but I mean, nothing is going to happen in a great hurry. As von der Leyen made it very clear, this is an issue for her children rather than for her. But I think what she said is significant, because I think one of the factors that would inhibit the British from reopening negotiations with the European Union on membership is the fact that the European Union wouldn't want it, because, you know, why would they want years of hassle after we've had Brexit? But her tone was very warm. I mean, I'm pretty confident before the decade is out, we will be on a trajectory to join. I wouldn't say rejoin, because Europe will then be very different. We'll have Ukraine probably as a member. We may be thinking about different tiers of membership, the kind of thing that Macron has been holding out. So, yeah, I think the direction of travel is towards closer integration with Europe, but not rejoining anytime soon.
We heard some of the words from Keir Starmer only a few months ago about not wanting to diverge from EU rules. And now, even if that doesn't mean rejoining the bloc, many people would sort of raise an eyebrow and think, well, if you're going to leave and have the friction with regard to many aspects of trade that creates, why wouldn't you choose the upsides of setting your own rules? Why would you leave and then follow all of their rules anyway?
Well, because we're already discovering that having diverging rules is very costly. And I think, first of all, there is a lot of objective evidence about the disruption that Brexit's caused. And crucially, there is a change in the public mood. I think we haven't got to the stage where there is a consensus about joining Union. There's still significant Brexit feeling. But the mood, I think, is that it was a mistake. And that we need to realign with the European Union. And it's not just economics. I think, you know, the war in Ukraine, I think, has fundamentally underlined the fact that we have very, very close common interests, and we should be working with the Europeans in areas where those common interests
Hasn't the war in Ukraine shown a bit of divergence between countries like Canada, the United States and the United Kingdom that have been on the more forefront level of supporting Ukraine, particularly with arms, compared to countries like Germany that have been very reluctant to provide militaristic support to the Ukrainians?
Well, that was true initially, but actually the Germans have provided an enormous amount of support, as well as taking in a large number of Ukrainians. And of course, the countries on the east of the European Union are those who are most strongly committed to support for Ukraine because they know what could come next. So, no, I would treat this as an area where the British and the Europeans are getting used to working together. And I think it will move on to economic issues where the costs of leaving have been very considerable.
Vince, just lastly, pro-Europeans often look at the European Union as a beacon of progressivism. Are you not concerned that actually if we rejoin the European Union or got closer, we're seeing the continent actually shift quite to the right? Are you not concerned about that we can forge our own path?
Yeah, I am very concerned. You know, populism, you call it right. I don't know whether right-left is a good way of dealing with it, but this kind of populism, anti-foreigner sentiment has been very strong. It's deeply entrenched in Hungary and recently in Slovakia. We've seen the impacts in Netherlands. It could happen in France. Yeah, it is concerning. It's nothing like as extreme as we encounter in the United States. And there's the real possibility of Trump returning to power that will create a big cleavage between Europe and the United States. But yeah, it is a worrying phenomenon. It's not totally absent in our own country. But yes, I think we have to deal with it and deal with it head on.
Discussions that certainly aren't going away, and perhaps this will become a larger conversation as we approach a likely election next year and that renegotiation in 2025.
Thank you, Vince Cable, for your time, Vice President of the European Movement and, of course, former leader of the Liberal Democrats. I was making that point because people always talk about the European Union as it's this beacon of progressivism, and actually, you know, it's moving quite quickly to the right.
Or to the populist side of things.
Yes.
But after the break, we'll be joined by our panel. Anis Denby and Matthew Stadlen will be here talking about the biggest stories, including whether the Prime Minister's migration policy is out of control.
Good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has accused his Greek counterpart of trying to grandstand over the possession of the Elgin marbles. Rishi Sunak defended his decision to cancel a planned meeting between the pair at PMQs this afternoon. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis posted his disappointment on social media, saying the Acropolis is where the sculptures belong. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer joked, saying the Prime Minister spent this week arguing about an ancient relic that only a tiny minority of the British public have any interest in. Meanwhile, the pair also clashed on their illegal migration views, with Starmer accusing the government's salary disparity as fuel for illegal migrants to come over. However, Rishi Sunak vowed his government is on track to keep his pledge to stop the boats. Israel has received a further list of people to be released by Hamas today. The exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners will be the 6th in the extended truce between Israel and Hamas, set to expire tomorrow morning. Israel says the truce could be extended, provided terror group Hamas continues to free at least 10 Israeli hostages per day. Israel Defense Forces say the 12 hostages released last night include 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. An inquest has found all 4 teenagers drowned following a car crash in North Wales. The bodies of Javon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wilf Fitchett and Hugo Morris were found in a silver Ford Fiesta on November 21st, which had left the road at Garrig overturned and was partially submerged in water. The A-level students failed to return home to Shropshire from an overnight camping trip to the Snowdonia area. And Labour has set out measures aimed at protecting small businesses from antisocial behaviour. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says ensuring invoices are paid on time and rolling out town centre police patrols are important and will be introduced if the party wins the next general election. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2693 and €1.1557. The price of gold, £1,608.49 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,451 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Joining us this afternoon is political commentator Matthew Stadlen and the editor of CapX, the online magazine, Alice Denby. Let's first of all turn to this extraordinary scene that we saw in the House of Commons just after midday, where the Labour Party is putting itself on the front foot on migration. Matthew, could you imagine that the Labour Party would be taking this line even 2 or 3 years ago?
Well, Labour have actually been tougher than you might think on immigration, and Starmer clearly senses an opening here. I mean, it's an open goal, isn't it? The Tories, 13 years ago, they've been in power for well over a decade now, wanted under David Cameron, who has returned as Foreign Secretary, to drive down figures, immigration figures, net figures, to tens of thousands. and now they're 700,000. So they have made a massive political error. They are hostage to their own fortune, and Starmer's just sort of sitting back and saying, well, look, on your own terms, you failed so dismally. And I think you could sense, we weren't in the Commons today, of course, but I think you could sense the mood on the Labour benches was buoyant. And there's something approaching despair on the Conservative benches. Starmer's policy, it seems to me, for quite some time, as well as detoxifying the Labour Party from Corbynism and the legacy of that, is just to sit back, at least for the majority of this Parliament, and watch the Tories tear themselves apart. And on that basis, he's doing a very good job.
Alice, could this be an immigration election?
Well, absolutely, but I think the question for Labour is that how would they bring it down? Because obviously these figures are legal migration. These are people who've come here completely legitimately. So which route is Keir Starmer, if he wants to be Prime Minister in waiting, going to clamp down on? Is it going to be international students? Is it going to be shortage occupations? Or is it going to be those refugee routes? He needs to suggest what he's going to do if he, has any hope.
And I can't imagine, when it comes down to it, when it comes down to the detail, Matthew, that he will be willing to, take a tough stance on this when it actually comes to the practical terms of migration policy, because let's remember, it's pretty obvious that a huge number of his backbenchers want to have very liberal immigration policy, whether it comes to asylum policy, whether it comes to students or whatever area it is. So is he just being opportunistic here, and he doesn't really care that much about migration?
I think he undoubtedly is being quite opportunistic, but that doesn't mean that the headlines are going to get any better for Rishi Sunak. As I understand it, one of his policies is to abolish this sort of 20% discount that employers can pay to people coming from overseas for some of these essential jobs, filling gaps in our labour market.
That's a good way of putting it. 20% discount.
I think we need to have we have to have a grown-up conversation about immigration. We have to be absolutely clear about what we want as a society. Where there are economic needs, there have to be politicians who can spell out the benefits of that, as well as having a proper discussion about the infrastructure in our country and whether it can keep pace with the change. Instead of just saying, look, we've got 600,000, this is a disaster, let's get our hands dirty in the nitty-gritty of it and work out what is best for Britain.
Isn't the problem here that when it comes to the nitty-gritty, and on the sort of broad picture thing, everyone says, oh, it should be lower. But then you ask, do you want fewer doctors? Do you want fewer nurses? Do you want fewer care home assistants? When it comes to the specific visa routes, very few politicians will make any sort of specific pledge at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I completely agree with you about this grown-up conversation. We have a completely broken labour market that, on the one hand, relies far too heavily on cheap immigrant labour, and on the other hand, has 1 million vacancies and mass economic inactivity. So we do need to have a grown-up conversation about that. And part of that conversation also needs to be the way in which we're betraying people who come here via completely legal visa routes, imagining that they're going to have a wonderful new life in Britain when we don't have the housing, we don't have the public services, and in many cases we don't have the good jobs that they are imagining.
Was a report done, though? Because the government tells us that everyone coming to Britain is here to work. And there was a report out recently that actually suggested only a fifth of those are coming here to work because of the number of dependents, because of students, because of other people. So I think we're being sold a bit of a lie, and I think the British people actually can see with their own eyes what's going on.
Well, look, I think there's so many different strands to this. There's asylum, there's immigration, there are dependents. I haven't heard yet a convincing argument as to why students need to bring over family members with them. I haven't heard a convincing argument yet as to why social care workers...
It would take one student to say, oh, but I really want my,
No, I'm not a softie. I'm not a softie, and I can't understand it. If you're a student forging away in the world, come over here. You don't need your family to support you.
And the law is changing. From January, students who aren't PhD students, so master's students or undergraduate students, will not be allowed to bring dependents as a matter of course.
But all of this is just a function of, as I say, the broken labour market. We also have a university sector that's completely reliant on foreign students while having, multiple degrees that just aren't worthwhile. And many international students come here, they do fairly rubbish degrees, they bring their family over and they don't have to look for a job for 2 years. The whole system needs to be looked at. The whole way we fund universities and the whole way that we...
While we were part of the European Union, it seemed to me that as a culture, as a society, we got used not to doing certain types of jobs. It was almost as though those jobs were below us. Whether, you know, we think of fruit picking as just an obvious example, but also social care, which is so vital. Having had a relative go through end-of-life care recently, the work that these people do, and to a man and a woman, they were people who had come to this country, is so critical. We need more British people to be prepared to do those sorts of jobs. If we aren't as a society, we are going to need to have people coming from abroad.
Well, Matthew, it's almost like we planned this exchange because you just mentioned the European Union. And we're going to listen now to a clip of Rishi Sunak, one of his attack lines from Prime Minister's questions, talking about the Leader of the Opposition.
Look, Mr. Speaker, no one will be surprised that he's backing an EU country over Britain. Just this last week he was asked, he was asked which song best sums up the Labour Party. What did he come up with? Well, Mr. Speaker, he showed his true colours and chose Ode to Joy, literally the anthem of the European Union. And he will back Brussels over Britain every single time.
Matthew, it wasn't the wisest political move for Keir Starmer to say the EU anthem is the song that best represents Labour.
But this is also, may I just add, that this is also very interesting because of that clip we showed earlier of Ursula von der Leyen essentially saying rejoining the EU would fix Brexit. With a Labour government, would we actually, you know, sneak back in there?
So, first of all, I'm not a Labour insider, but I've said repeatedly on GB News, I cannot imagine that under Keir Starmer we're going to re-enter the European Union. I just don't see it happening. Maybe if they had...
Madder things have happened,
maybe if they won 2 elections in a row towards the end of the second term, if everything was going well, maybe it would be discussed. It's fantasy. Was it a wise choice? It was a really daft choice. I don't know whether he thinks that Remainers listen to Classic FM, because that was where he was giving the interview.
Right.
But maybe he was playing to that audience, and if he was, it was a bit stupid because, of course, the clip is going to be picked up and played elsewhere.
I think what I would say in his defence is a very rousing tune, to be fair.
It's really annoying the EU took it on, right?
It is annoying, yeah. But I also think this is a sign of just what a sort of journey Keir Starmer has been on politically, having been Labour's Brexit secretary in charge of their policy of whatever it was, a second referendum or staying in the single market, to now, as you say, I think seeming to lead a party that seems unlikely to be planning to go back in, but we'll see.
Starmer isn't saying much, is he? I was talking to a very good friend of mine, a childhood friend yesterday. Went for a walk with my 14-month-old. He's the godfather, and he has always, as far as I know, voted Conservative. And I said, well, why would you vote Conservative this time round? What is it about this crumbling Tory government that still appeals? And what is it about Starmer that you would dislike so much? Well, we like to talk our politics, rehearsing for my
and
GB
what did
News.
He say?
No, he by the end of it accepted that it's going to be quite tough, I think, for him to vote Tory. But he does want to hear more from Starmer as to what his blueprint for success is for this country. And we haven't heard much.
Earlier, he must be the luckiest man in politics. Just standing still while the SNP implode in infighting, while the Tories implode in infighting. But also, according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, net migration is set to tumble even with no policy changes, mainly because all of the students who didn't come in during COVID all then came in, but then a bunch of them leave. So on net figures, the net figures will be much lower thanks to all the students leaving.
And Ukrainian
after that
refugees will go down as well. Look, you do need luck in politics, but I think he's played this fairly well. He's been risk-averse. Occasionally, when he has come out with a policy, it's backfired and he's had to U-turn. But don't underestimate how big a challenge it was for him to, as I said earlier, to detoxify, as my words, as my view, many will disagree, detoxify the Labour Party from the Jeremy Corbyn era. When Jeremy Corbyn was leader of that party that I'd voted for throughout my life at general elections, I was unable to vote Labour. Now, someone like me is able to come back into the fold, and that is a big political tick.
And I do think we have to give him credit for how quickly he's managed to do it. So if you look at the Thatcher years, for example, it took, multiple terms for Labour to turn themselves around and look electable again, and he's managed to do it in,
But
3?
Alice, is it only surface level? Because we did see a third of Labour MPs vote with Jeremy Corbyn when it came to a Gaza ceasefire. We saw 10 front benchers have to resign their positions because they are taking the line that Jeremy Corbyn takes on it. Now, they might not be listening to what Jeremy Corbyn says, but they're voting along his lines rather than Starmer's lines.
I mean, I think once he wins the next election, I think a lot of his MPs will fall in line. I do think that foreign affairs is a big weakness for him, and I do think having stood in front of the British people and asked them to make Jeremy Corbyn their Prime Minister is a weakness for him. But it does get a bit tedious when Tory MPs keep using that attack line, because I don't think the public buy it anymore.
It does feel like a very long time.
It was a really difficult thing. Look, I've got lots of friends and family members as well who stuck by Labour during those years, some of them Jewish. And if everyone had abandoned ship, if all MPs had simply thrown away their Labour membership cards, and the Labour Party would have fallen to pieces. So you can understand the logic of trying to change things gently from within the shadow cabinet. As I said, I couldn't vote for Labour, but I can understand why someone like Starmer stuck with it rather than jumping ship.
I do wonder whether there is a great enthusiasm, though, Alice, for people who are going to put their tick in the Labour box come the next election, because we talk about this quite a lot on the channel, how to some people it seems as though there is, you know, a Rizzler paper between the two parties on major policies. I mean, with this migration questioning in PMQs, is there really any difference?
Or indeed on the issue of whether or not you're allowed to buy a Rizzler paper.
Well,
if you're born after 2008, both parties would say you can't.
I suspect one of the biggest cohort of voters at the next election will be the people who can't be bothered, who stay at home. But I do disagree with you on this idea that Keir Starmer was trying to change the party from inside the shadow cabinet. I think everything he's done in his political career suggests that he's an opportunist, an operator, and I think he wanted to be in the shadow cabinet because he thought that that was his best route to power.
Just on this political...
It is worth making that reminder.
On the political question of whether there's much between the two parties, it's really vital to remember that Richard Tice, who's himself a presenter on this channel, could be the kingmaker for Labour at the next election, because some Tories will undoubtedly stay at home. Others may go to Richard Tice's party, and if they do that, that could push Labour over the line to become not just the biggest party, but overall victory.
On some polls, they may be on a 10%.
Although unlikely to win many seats, so perhaps a spoiler effect there, but no doubt influential. And, of course, UKIP was a massively influential force while only winning one seat. But, of course, lots more to come on the show. Don't go anywhere. But before all that, let's get your weather update.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It will stay dry and clear for many through the rest of the day, but it will be feeling very cold, and as a result there are some snow and ice warnings in force for Thursday morning. We're going to be seeing some snow being brought by this cold front along northeastern coasts through the rest of the day and tomorrow, and then some further rain and potentially snow across the southwest later. So as that rain across the southwest moves northwards and bumps into the colder air, it could start to bring some snow to the high ground of Devon and Cornwall. Snow showers across the northeast as well as Northern Ireland will bring a risk of some icy stretches by Thursday morning. Widely though, it's going to be a very cold start to Thursday, as we could be as low as -8 in rural areas of Scotland and northwest England. So a very cold start to the day, but some sunshine to be had in similar areas where we'll see it through today, parts of Northern Ireland and much of northern and western England. In the south, though, it will stay cloudier with that rain and potentially hill snow persisting through much of the day. There'll be another cold day, temperatures only reaching 4 or 5 degrees for many of us. Across the far north of Scotland, it's going to be windy, so we'll feel chillier up here. And on Friday morning, it will be another very cold start. We could see some freezing fog across southeastern areas, so that will bring a bit of a murky start. There'll be some more sunshine around on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we could see the temperatures finally starting to rise a little.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's your weather. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Please stay with us. We've got plenty more to bring you over the next hour, including the very latest on that royal racism row and Sunak's rather bruising time at Prime Minister's questions.
Yes, it's indeed. Are these books being pulped in the Netherlands, or has this royal name slipped its way into the media? We'll find out the very latest after that. And also, of course, big questions to come over migration and the United Kingdom's policies. That next.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 29th of November.
Keir Starmer's migration gamble. The Labour leader demands changes on migration policy, but after repeated U-turns, will people believe his tough on immigration stance?
Royal racism row. The Dutch version of this new bombshell book has been pulled from the shelves. It's being pulped after it named the royal at the centre of this alleged racism scandal involving Prince Harry and Meghan's unborn son's skin.
And Dublin riots aftermath. It's nearly a week on since the Dublin riots that were sparked by right-wing groups after 3 children were stabbed in the capital. But have the government dealt with the situation in the correct manner?
And freezing fog is set to engulf Britain, with temperatures plummeting to -8 degrees. The country's been placed on alert, with the yellow weather warning expected to last until Tuesday, the 5th of December. It's going to be very chilly indeed.
It is going to be very chilly indeed. The meteorologist wouldn't be drawn on whether we're heading towards a white Christmas, though. They always say this, and then it ends up being, 11 degrees and raining.
Do you know what? We'll have to get Alex Deakin back, because I want to know the definition of a white Christmas. Is it one snowdrop? Is it one snowflake? In which case, none of us would really notice. I mean, and in some parts of the country, up mountains, it's always a white Christmas. I mean, how do we define this?
It definitely has to settle.
Has to settle. But where does it have to settle? I mean, on Ben Nevis? I mean, it's always a white Christmas on Ben Nevis. Maybe I should go to Ben Nevis.
Well, up in Aberdeenshire, where I have some family, they do.
Wait, are you royal?
Pardon? No, I'm not royal.
Just when I casually go to Balmoral every Christmas, where my family is.
Well, sometimes people are not Balmoral.
Wouldn't put it past you.
Well, some people say, I've got a regal air about me. You, I'm not so sure.
No, I'm common as muck. But let's get to all of these stories and more after your headlines.
Tom and Emily, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has accused his Greek counterpart of trying to grandstand over the possession of the Elgin marbles. Rishi Sunak defended his decision to cancel a planned meeting between the pair at Prime Minister's Questions this afternoon. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis posted his disappointment on social media, saying the Acropolis is where the sculptures belong. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer joked, saying the Prime Minister spent this week arguing about an ancient relic that only a tiny minority of the British public have any interest in. Meanwhile, the pair clashed on their illegal migration views, with Starmer accusing the government's salary disparity as fuel for illegal migrants to come to the UK.
Rather than deal with the facts, he's prosecuting his one-man war on reality. And that reality is stuck. Under this government, a bricklayer from overseas can be paid £2,500 less than somebody who's already here. A plasterer, £3,000 less. An engineer, £6,000 less. The list goes on. It's absurd. Labour would scrap his perverse wage-cutting policy. Why won't he?
Really a bit rich to hear about this from someone who described all immigration law as racist, who literally said it was a mistake to control immigration. We have taken steps and we will take further steps, which is why recent estimates of immigration show that it's slowing. It's why next year the immigration health surcharge will increase by over 2/3. It's why immigration fees are going up by up to 35%.
Israel has received a further list of people to be released by Hamas today. The exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners will be the 6th in the extended truce between Israel and Hamas, set to expire tomorrow morning. Israel says the truce could be extended provided Hamas continues to free at least 10 Israeli hostages per day. Israel Defense Forces say the 12 hostages released last night include 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. Spokesperson for the Israeli government, Eylon Levy, says they won't rest until they bring every hostage home.
161 people remain as hostages in the Gaza Strip. That number includes 146 Israelis and 15 foreigners. That doesn't include dual nationals. 126 are men and 35 are women. There are still 4 children under the age of 18, 4 aged 18 to 19, and 10 people aged 75 and older, including the husbands of many of the elderly women who have been released from captivity and now returning home with their husbands still hostages of Hamas.
An inquest has found all 4 teenagers drowned following a car crash in North Wales. The bodies of Javon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wilf Fitchett and Hugo Morris were found in a silver Ford Fiesta on November 21st, which had left the road at Garreg overturned and was partially submerged in water. The A-level students failed to return home to Shropshire from an overnight camping trip to the Snowdonia area. Labour has set out measures aimed at protecting small businesses from antisocial behaviour. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says ensuring invoices are paid on time and rolling out town centre police patrols are both important and will be introduced if the party wins the next general election. In a GB News exclusive, he told our economics and business editor Liam Halligan the disparity between larger companies and small businesses is growing.
Legitimate concerns about the public sector and how it relates to late payments. So look, we will take that and put that into the plan. What we've fundamentally tried to do, however, is not just say the solution to this is particular targets or rights for smaller businesses, because they will tell us, well, look, you can have the right to enforce contractual terms on a larger business. If that is such an important customer to you, you're not in a position to do that. And that's why what we put forward is this argument around transparency, around having audit committees report on how quickly larger businesses are paying their smaller suppliers, so that we can all see as consumers, as customers, what is exactly going on.
A controversial new book about the royal family has been pulled from bookshelves in the Netherlands. Endgame has been taken off Dutch shelves amid reports the book names members of the royal family who allegedly asked about the skin colour of Harry and Meghan's son before he was born. The Dutch publisher says an error occurred in the translation and is currently being rectified. The new version will be available in bookstores in the country by Friday. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Well, it was quite a punchy PMQs today. Rishi Sunak was very much put on the defensive. Sir Keir Starmer attacked the government's failure to control immigration and the Prime Minister's decision to cancel a meeting with the Greek Prime Minister at the 11th hour.
However, the Prime Minister did manage to land a few blows of his own, pointing out the Labour leader's historic pro-immigration stance, including a new quote from Sir Keir as a shadow immigration minister. And he accused Sir Keir Starmer of always backing Brussels over Britain.
So joining us now is GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Is this a taste, maybe, of the election campaign that we're all waiting for, the general election? Will it be migration, migration, migration?
I think increasingly so. There is frustration on the Tory backbenches about a lack of action here. Certainly since these numbers have been soaring since 2019, when this party was re-elected for the fourth time, and no action. The numbers have got almost trebled. I mean, that's because the people running the party, the PM, Boris Johnson, of course, latterly Mr Sunak, appear to be quite relaxed about large numbers of net migration. Maybe they believe the Treasury, which thinks that having more big numbers, maybe 240,000 a year, can help fuel the economic growth we so desperately need. But there's a big concern about the impact on communities. You hear from Red Wall MPs like Jonathan Gullis and others complaining about the impact on GP surgeries, more people needing surgeries, needing support there, forgive me, and dentist treatment, that kind of thing. So there's definitely a disconnect, which is not being gripped, and it was a real punchy PMQs from Sir Keir Starmer. I've been in the House of Commons over lunchtime. Many say it's his best yet. He really attacked the PM on his record on net migration, and he also attacked him on the issue of the much less important, on the Elgin marbles, and not seeing the Greek Premier yesterday, saying that was an example of small-minded government, and he should be bigger than that. But yeah, I think we are going to see, definitely, Emily, that this is the tone of the next election. Right now, the clock is ticking now on the government doing anything on net migration on small boats. We're 2 weeks since the Supreme Court ruling on the Rwanda policy. We're meant to see something on that to find a way that can make sure that we can send illegally arrived migrants to Rwanda for processing. Separate to that, there's measures to try and tighten who can come here legally with visas, with the Migration Advisory Committee being looked at again by the government, the PM announced today. Lots more to do, but nothing actually happening, and that's what's so frustrating, I think, for Tory MPs.
It's really interesting seeing Sir Keir Starmer perhaps sitting on the fence less than he used to, perhaps a new tone from him. But also, we heard something new from the Prime Minister, a quote of Sir Keir Starmer speaking when he was shadow immigration minister only a couple of years ago, and he said that limiting skilled migration to the UK would be an act of economic vandalism. Is this a taste of many more quotes we're going to see Conservative Research Department dig up from Sir Keir Starmer when perhaps he was less thinking about what the country thinks?
You're totally right, Tom. This is an area which Rishi Sunak thinks that we need to understand a bit of nuance on the immigration debate. I was lucky enough to be at the Global Investment Summit at Hampton Court for GB News on Monday, and he gave it in his prepared remarks, his speech, not in a Q&A, his prepared remarks. He said, we need to recognise that we don't have the monopoly on talent in this country. We need to bring in people from outside of this country to help generate the businesses of tomorrow. So he would say, yes, we need more skilled talent, and he's using that language back at Sir Keir Starmer, as you said, economic vandalism to allow more skilled migrants in, or forgive me, to stop them arriving, and he sees some movement there for the PM to make the Tories make some hay against the Labour Party. Certainly, Mr. Sunak is keen to stress we do need some migration, just not the numbers at the moment. But it's on his watch. Where can he go on it?
Well, thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, our political editor, live from Westminster. Very difficult indeed for the Prime Minister.
I'm very interested to see what more quotes the Conservative Research Department has up its sleeve. I can only imagine that this is just the beginning of what we're starting to see.
The Conservatives were mocked a bit, weren't they, about their posters, not their posters, their marketing tools. They weren't the best.
Which marketing?
The ones that they put on social media. They're not always the best graphics, are they?
Oh, but
the Labour Party has some, zingers.
Oh, sometimes, though, in the 2019 election, the Conservative Party would deliberately put things out that were misspelled or that were in funny fonts or that just looked a bit off. And it's because they hired a communication strategists from New Zealand called Toppen and Goering.
Right.
And these guys generated organic shares of this stuff. They're called hate shares.
Right.
When someone will look at this ridiculous thing the Tories have put out, and it means they're sharing it, they're getting this advertising, but not having to pay for it.
So they're putting out...
So it's quite clever.
Misspelt graphics. So
and then everyone shares it saying, look how silly the Tories are, but actually then people are seeing the messages.
Gosh, now that is a strategy. I'm not sure whether it would work. Anyway,
it's called hate share.
By the way, we've had lots of different emails coming in about what exactly defines a white Christmas, or how is a white Christmas defined. So we'll get to those in just a bit, because there are many weird and wonderful theories coming in the inbox, and I'm not sure who's right. So we shall see.
I enjoyed one person who wrote in and said it's one snowflake landing on the roof of the Met Office.
Could well be. One single snowflake.
But the new royal book has been taken off the shelves in the Netherlands, following reports suggesting that this Netherlands translation includes the names of the person who allegedly expressed concerns over the skin colour of Harry and Meghan's son.
Yes, the publicist has put sales of the book on hold over what they call an error, which is currently being rectified. So joining us now to discuss this is royal commentator Judita De Silva. Thank you very much for joining us, Judita. And what do you make of this whole scenario here, this saga? Do you think it was an innocent error?
It just depends on who you believe. I think what's probably happened is Omid Scobie has said categorically that he's never interviewed Harry and Meghan for this or the last book. He has shared friends between himself and Meghan, which helps with getting his inside scoops. But he said there was no version where he mentioned the names of, he says, two royals that questioned how dark Archie's, the then unborn Prince Archie, would be. And Meghan had written to then Prince Charles, now King Charles, about it and talking about unconscious bias. And he'd never put the names in any version. But the Dutch say that Dutch journalists got a page which actually had the names, and this was part of the version that went to print. The key is now that you've got a situation like this, you've got to understand that the camp that's around Harry and Meghan and people on the periphery, it seems to be a very porous outfit, because things tend to be getting out, whether it's, as Meghan said in court, that she forgot she gave permission to an aide to speak to Omid Scobie and his co-writer of the first book, Finding Freedom, or it's her friend speaking to People magazine. It's a porous outfit, so information is coming out. But this information that's potentially damaging and could completely break any relationships they have with the royal family is in too many hands. Omid Scobie knows, some journalists in the Netherlands know, and other people know. That is what makes things very dicey when it comes to trying to control the narrative.
Fascinating how these passages might have ended up in this book if Omid Scobie, the author, had never intended them to. Could it have been that there was an original draft that included lots more salacious, perhaps even defamatory allegations that were then removed but clearly slipped through the translation process elsewhere?
This is exactly what I do think, and again, still allege that this could have happened, might have happened, because you have several versions on the way to getting your final version for print. And this goes to your publishers, goes to the editors, and then it's tweaked and so on. And these copies still exist. What I believe is that if you understand where Omid Scobie is in the professional perspective, this is a writer who found a ridiculous amount of attention with that first book. He's no longer just a writer of books. He's a man who's making money. He's in the business of being successful. So by the time this book was pitched to publishers, there's an expectation for him. He has an inside track with Harry and Meghan. They want something that's punchy. They want something that's sexy. They want something that's going to fly off the shelves. He's got to write to deliver, to be getting the kind of advance he would want to get on this book. So there probably, I believe, is a version where he put in everything and then upon reflection scaled it back. Now, who has that version? Who knows? But then, like he said in the book, due to legal barriers in the UK, he can't mention the names. Neither can any journalist covering the story, because then you are liable for legal action against you for putting out such detrimental, reputation damaging allegations about the royal family. So I do think there is a copy that had the name in it, but then it was scaled back based on prudence.
Well, it certainly kept the book in the press, at the top of the news agenda, what's happened in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for your time, Judita de Silva, royal commentator there. What a mess. Absolutely. Can't be easy for the royal family to see all of this going on and, not being able to comment and put your own...
Never complain, never explain.
Well, exactly. Now, we want to return to what happened last week in the Irish capital. Last Thursday it was, when riots broke out. The Irish government are under fire with politicians' complacency about violent anti-immigrant groups accused for the outbreak.
But the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has asked people to avoid connecting crime with migration, saying it's not right. And there's also this secondary issue of new hate speech laws that are being brought in Ireland, seemingly in response.
Yes, so let's speak to talk show host and broadcaster Niall Boylan to give us the very latest. Niall, let's start with that hate speech legislation. I know you're very concerned about what happened in Dublin, the riots that took place after that horrific stabbing of children. You're concerned that the government may be using this to push through even tougher hate speech legislation, essentially censorship.
This hate speech legislation has been around for the last 2 years, but came into the news more so at the start of this year. And initially, it would seem to surround the idea that people were making defamatory comments about members of the transgender community. That's what it seemed to be very much focused on, the LGBT plus community, going back about 8 months ago. So many people objected to the legislation. Even in the public submissions, over 3/4 of the people who put in a public submission said the legislation was unnecessary, because you have to remember, we already have incitement to hatred laws from 1989. Updating those laws would have been no harm, of course, to include social media, but they've added this element of hate speech. Now, the minister will not and refuses to define the word hate. And she was asked numerous questions in interviews about, would J.K. Rowling, for example, come under this legislation? And she went, no, that'll be okay. Would this come under the legislation? Oh, well, maybe that would. So in other words, nobody actually knows what she means by the word hate. So people have huge concerns now that if you even voice an opinion on something or something you doesn't like, in other words, this is very subjective and open to the interpretation of a person, you could find yourself in trouble. And the most concerning part of the legislation is if a member of An Garda Síochána, our police force, suspect you might be in possession of hateful material, i.e. somebody has sent you a silly meme that might, by some people's definition, be racist or homophobic, and they can get a court order that morning in a district court, not a high court, district court, just like that, go into your house, take your devices, and if you're in possession of it, you can be charged, fined, and go to jail. And not only that, so can your employer, depending if you did it on work time. I mean, this is the most Orwellian piece of legislation anybody has ever seen. We're being laughed at around the world. Elon Musk has quoted as saying that Leo Varadkar hates the Irish people. I mean, Elon Musk also said about this piece of legislation going back months ago that it was restrictive, it was authoritarian. I mean, this piece of legislation is absolutely nuts. Nobody agrees with it, but it's come off the back. And I suppose we really have to fill you in on the whole background of what's happened here in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, going back 4 weeks ago, we had 2 very high-profile murder cases here in Ireland. One, Aisling Murphy, a young school teacher, who was stabbed to death by Joseph Pushka, who was found guilty and given life in prison. Aidan Moffat and Michael Snee were stabbed to death and decapitated by Joseph Pellini, who also got a full life sentence. And these are only in the last few weeks. And then the tragedy, of course, of the young girl who is now still in critical condition in hospital. Thankfully, the other 2 children have been released from hospital. The school teacher is still in hospital in a serious condition. And the riots that happened or ensued afterwards, what the government are doing is associating the riots with anybody who disagrees with immigration or immigration policy, which is not the case at all, because those rioters, they don't have any political motive. They're just gombeans. They're just idiots who just went out and decided to cause trouble and took an opportunity to loot shops, to set fire to buildings. Normal people who are on the right of centre wouldn't do things like that. So the government is now deflecting away from the actual immigration debate by saying, let's push through with this legislation you all hate anyway. And not only that, they want to bring in other legislation before Christmas that will make it legal for the Garda Síochána and, I suppose, on the streets as well, to use facial recognition cameras, which the Irish Council of Civil Liberties said goes against our human rights and our privacy, and there's issues around that, and also that they're actually inaccurate. So it's a huge political football where you've got Sinn Féin, the opposing party in government, mind you, not doing a great job, probably the worst opposing party in the history of the Irish state, because they seem to go along with everything the government says, but they're now demanding the resignation of the Justice Minister. They're demanding the resignation of the Chief of Police because they believe it was so badly organised last week, and all they're doing is blaming social media on everything.
Gosh, well, Niall Boylan, thank you for running us through that at great speed. It's such a complicated scenario. Of course, no doubt the government of Ireland would argue that limiting what they see as hate speech would prevent more riots like this. But as you say, that is deeply contested as to whether it was speech at all that really did start these thugs deciding to burn things in the capital of Ireland. I'm afraid we've run out of time there, but Niall Boylan, talk show host and broadcaster in the Republic, thank you very much for giving us the latest.
Why don't people in power think that censorship is the solution to people having problems with your policy?
Right, and if people broke the law by burning things, why wouldn't they break the law by saying things as well? Well, we'll be getting to many more stories here on Good Afternoon Britain after this.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Is the UK set to head back into the European Union? Well, not that long ago, the man leading the polls, Sir Keir Starmer, said we don't want to diverge from EU rules.
The more we share values, the more we share a future together, the less the conflict. And actually, different ways of solving problems are become available. Actually, we don't want to diverge.
And then last week, the Labour leader said the music that best represents his party is the EU anthem.
The Labour Party, one of the pieces I've got is Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the choral Ode to Joy. That's been hardwired in me for a long, long time. So I would go with that. There are many others that I could associate with the Labour Party, but it's that sense of moving forward to a better place.
A better place? Well, last night we saw a further piece of the puzzle. The European Union President Ursula von der Leyen has opened the door to the United Kingdom rejoining.
Speaking of this European Union, do you believe that Britain could ever rejoin this European Union? Britain? Who? It's a small country with an ambassador sitting right there. It's a small pirate island off the coast of France. UK. United Kingdom. Could it rejoin the European Union?
Ambassador. So, Ambassador, you know my position. First of all, thanks God, with the Windsor Agreement, we had a new beginning for old friends. Very important. And then I must say, I keep telling my children, you have to fix it. We goofed it up. You have to fix it. So I think here, too, the direction of travel, my personal opinion, is clear.
That little island, Great Britain.
It's actually quite a big island. This is something that actually annoys me. Can you name an island around the world that's bigger? OK, Japan, sure. Greenland, perhaps. Madagascar, yes. But beyond that...
Does Iceland count as a... No.
Iceland is smaller than Great Britain. I mean, the Iberian Islands are smaller. Most of the Greek islands are small. It's not a small island. You look at the average size of an island on the Earth, Great Britain is one of the largest islands.
It reminds me of Emma Thompson. Remember the lovely Emma Thompson, who described Britain, was it after Brexit or during the Brexit debate, as some miserable, what did she call it?
Cold, rainy, miserable...
Cake-eating... I'm sure someone at home will remind us of exactly what she said, because we do like to mock our country, don't we?
But the reason that this is all important, the reason why Sir Keir Starmer's more bolder and bolder pronouncements on this issue, and indeed why what Ursula von der Leyen said last night is suddenly becoming very noteworthy indeed, is something that's written into the Brexit deal. The option to renew, revise or terminate the agreement every 5 years. Now, of course, this agreement was passed in 2020, after the 2019 election. Therefore, in 2025, the current deal set by Boris Johnson's administration will expire and negotiations with the EU could reopen.
So, there is a very real opportunity for the UK, depending on its government, to re-enter, rejoin,
or
cozy back up
renegotiate.
to, renegotiate, whatever verb you want to use, rejoin the European Union. Now, Vince Cable was on earlier, of course, the massive Europhile. He's also the the co-founder of the European movement.
He's one of the former he held a former president of the European movement, something like that. But also, of course, former leader of the Lib Dems, a very distinguished individual.
Of course. Now we've got lots of emails because a lot of you were a little bit annoyed by some of the things Vince Cable had to say. Vince Cable thinks populism is a bad thing. Why is it something that's popular with the people bad? This is what I don't get. Populism is always called, is always derided. But actually, don't we want leaders who do things that people want?
Well, it depends, because there are some movements and parties that are described as populist, but don't tend to get big shares of the vote. So I don't quite think that populist always means popular.
Yeah, although Donald Trump did very much become president of the United States, and he was called a populist, and Boris Johnson was called a populist.
With a smaller share of the vote than Hillary Clinton.
Boris Johnson was called a populist. But yes, lots of you were very annoyed that we were described as a little island in that clip we just showed. Just a little island off the northwest of Europe who just happened to save their backsides twice last century, says Gary. Always diplomatic, Gary is.
It's hard to think of a country with more cultural reach, hard to think of a country... I mean, a G7 economy, the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. I mean, by what metric are you saying the United Kingdom is small? Sounds like someone's a little bit paranoid, perhaps, about their own little country.
Maybe it's that. Anyway, you're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. In just one moment, we'll be rejoined by our wonderful panel. Perhaps we'll get their view on your views as to that little island comment in that clip with Ursula von der Leyen we just watched.
Good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Breaking news. The Israeli army are investigating claims made by the Hamas terror group that a family thought to be held hostage have been killed in an Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip. 10-month-old Kafir Bibas and his 4-year-old brother, along with their mother, are still thought to be held in captivity. Israel has received a further list of people to be released by Hamas today. The exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners will be the 6th in the extended truce between Israel and Hamas, which is set to expire tomorrow morning. Israel says the truce could be extended, provided the terror group continues to free at least 10 Israeli hostages per day. Israel Defense Forces say the 12 hostages released last night include 10 Israelis and 2 Thai nationals in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. The Prime Minister has accused his Greek counterpart of trying to grandstand over the possession of the Elgin marbles. Rishi Sunak defended his decision to cancel a planned meeting between the pair at PMQ this afternoon. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis posted his disappointment on social media, saying the Acropolis is where the sculptures belong. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer joked, saying the Prime Minister spent this week arguing about an ancient relic that only a tiny minority of the British public have any interest in. Meanwhile, the pair clashed on their illegal migration views, with Starmer accusing the government's salary disparity as fuel for illegal migrants to come to the country. However, Rishi Sunak vowed his government is on track to keep his pledge to stop the boats. An inquest has found all 4 teenagers drowned following a car crash in North Wales. The bodies of Javon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wolf Fitchett and Hugo Morris were found in a silver Ford Fiesta on November 21st, which had left the road at Garreg overturned and was partially submerged in water. The A-level students had failed to return home to Shropshire from an overnight camping trip to the Snowdonia area. And Labour has set out measures aimed at protecting small businesses from antisocial behaviour. Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says ensuring invoices are paid on time and rolling out town centre police patrols are important and will be introduced if the party wins the next general election. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Well, we're delighted to be joined by our panel once more, the political commentator Matthew Stadlen and the editor of the CapX online magazine, Alice Denby. Now, the first story that we want to dig into is something that has been creating rather a lot of controversy, particularly online.
Yes, so the story is ITV bosses have been accused of a racism stitch-up involving Nigel Farage, that's the head of the first elimination on I'm a Celebrity.
Yes, let's dig into the very the details here, because the story is, and it was first published by The Express, that ITV are preparing to publish a story saying Nigel Farage has said allegedly racist things. But you dig into it, and it's from something called a cameo account. This is where anyone can write in, and for a fee, a celebrity will read out something they've written. I don't know, Matthew, do you think that there might have just been something that Nigel didn't notice that he was paid to say, and therefore... I don't know the legitimacy.
I remember, and I mean, loath it be for me to defend Nigel Farage, because we're sort of political enemies, although we're perfectly civil when we see each other. But I remember on my last day at school, one of the deputy masters would have to read out the notices in the breaks, and someone slipped in something that he read out as if it was normal, but in fact, because it looked like one thing, but when he read it out, it was something that I can't mention on air.
Wow.
So, in other words, they deliberately tripped him up, which I think is what is being suggested happened here with Nigel Farage. But the idea that ITV itself are trying to stitch up Nigel Farage seems to be a bit far-fetched, because they have supposedly paid him £1.5 million. You'd think that they want him to be on I'm a Celebrity for as long as possible.
But then why would ITV reportedly plan on publishing these videos and making a story out of it, Alice, if it's not part of a stitch-up?
It gets everyone talking, doesn't it? I mean, Nigel Farage has done a very good job for ITV of getting everybody talking, and I think perhaps this is just part of this. I mean, it's difficult for us to comment on it because we haven't seen, we don't know what he's being accused of, but I think it's fair to say that, you know, he's making headlines.
All we know is there was a comment. We do know some of the other things that have been found on his Cameo account. There was one individual who got him to say the words, "up the rah," which is a phrase in support of the IRA, which I don't think anyone believes Nigel Farage would knowingly say. But when you're doing hundreds or thousands of these paid-for messages and just reading it out, perhaps it's very easy for these things.
I mean, it's possible, if ITV are trying to highlight something like this, if that is the case, then it's possible that they are getting cold feet because of the backlash that we've seen about Nigel Farage being on their channel. So who knows? It is quite difficult to comment on it. I would just remind viewers that I think it was a year ago when those figures about London came out, he did seem disappointed, and he was wrong about the facts actually at the time, not his fault. He did seem disappointed that London was supposedly no longer a majority white city. And I would say, well, why does it matter what colour skin your fellow citizens in London have? And I called him out on that in no uncertain terms.
Well, this sort of leads us on to what's been happening in the jungle, and there was a bit of a heated disagreement about cultural appropriation between, once again, Nigel Farage and Nella Rose.
Who is an online influencer. And they had a heated row over what is cultural appropriation. And this was after the campmates started using accents, and Nigel said something along the lines of, oh, that's cultural appropriation, you can't do that. But it turned into something much more heated.
Yes, Nigel Farage got sort of told off, essentially, for being a bit backwards with his views on what is allowed to be said and what isn't. And Nigel went on to say, who knows what you can say these days? You know, it's changing all the time. But, and this is quite funny, actually, a little clip has resurfaced of Ant and Dec, the hosts of the show, indulging in a little bit of cultural appropriation themselves. Shall we have a look?
My takeaway.
Is it now?
Recreated. And what are you doing in the background? Can you remember? We've got to find the promo shot now. Got the shot.
2002.
Me, sombrero, some maracas.
You is sombrero, but no maracas. We've both got sombreros on.
And candy floss. Right, got you a sombrero.
Right.
Got that over me maracas.
Now, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I think we'd all say, what's the harm in that? But clearly, some people think that dressing in a sombrero is now apparently offensive.
15 years ago, 20 years ago, come on.
Do you think people are offended by that today? I mean...
Well, why do we ask people of Mexican heritage? I mean, if you're not allowed to blackface, and I think we can all agree that that is a no-no, and rightly so, then it's not that big a step saying, well, we shouldn't really be wearing a sombrero and sort of laughing and joking as if you're a Mexican.
Bit miserable, though, isn't it?
I find it difficult to be offended by that. I'm not Mexican, though, so I mean, it's difficult for me to say. But I mean, that's.
But anyway, crucially, Nigel Farage raised the issue of whether you can dress as a Mexican, and Nella said it all depends on the context. So, was this context in Anton Deck's case fine, or were they, you know, mocking the national dress?
I think there's a difference. I think many times what is termed as cultural appropriation could better be termed as cultural appreciation. Sombreros are fun. People like eating Mexican food. People like it. I mean, we were talking yesterday about the croquettes that M&S are now serving that have been accused of cultural appropriation because they mixed Spanish dishes together. I mean, to some extent, we are going a bit far with this stuff.
Yeah, I think it would be a pretty miserable culture if everybody just had to stay within their own kind of lane, culturally speaking. I think, you know, throughout history, cultures have been inspired by each other and fed off each other. And obviously there are points when that strays into racism, blackface clearly unacceptable. But yeah, I think are we not heading towards a very censorious and, you know, unfun
Maybe
time?
it's quite difficult to work out where the line should exactly be drawn.
That's what Nigel was saying.
But if you have, but I'm saying, but if you put on a French beret, right, and onions, not that many people are going to complain, but that's because the French don't tend to be the victims of racial discrimination. Black people clearly have been the victims of discrimination, and I would argue that so have Mexicans. So I think dressing up in a sombrero probably just about is on the wrong side of the line. So a cross next to Anton Deck from me for that one. But if you're putting a beret on, or if you were French and you were doing the roast beef thing, I think that's probably
Who
OK.
decides this, though? Because there's no rule book.
We do as a culture, we do as a society.
Everyone gets given.
And in different polities, people are on different oppression scales, if you want to go that far and that high-minded about it. I mean, there are countries where governments might steal the land or oppress people because they have white skin.
Do you think blackface is a no-no?
Yes.
Why?
I think it has a particular historical train of thought behind it, a particular racist mocking behind it, that I don't think the motivation of wearing a Mexican hat quite has the same history.
A lot of people 20 years ago who dressed up in blackface, they might have gone to a fancy dress party as Nelson Mandela, for example, as a white person, they wouldn't, by any means, all of them have intended malice, and yet we accept that you can't do that now.
Well, because it's clearly in the same vein as a minstrel show and the very the Jim Crow era, named after, of course, an incredibly famous form of awful discriminatory blackface.
Do you know what I find interesting about the whole conversation between Nigel Farage and Nello is that we often see in our culture now younger people telling older people how they should behave and what they can and can't say, and sort of policing their speech according to their own newfound cultural norms of how people should express themselves.
It's interesting because people like Nigel are told they're fighting a culture war, whereas he's saying what would be completely normal 15 years ago, as you were saying. I suppose a lot of people in this country feel like they haven't moved at all. Everything else has moved, and now they're told that they're the radicals.
Little Britain, which was on TV about 15 or 20 years ago, I mean, they had blackface in Little Britain, didn't they?
I found that offensive at the time. But I think your idea that you can't make fun of Mexican people is pretty patronising, to be honest. Is that not a kind of bigotry of low expectations?
Couldn't you? This is tricky, and that's why I wonder whether it is difficult on the Mexican issue, because you could say it's patronising to say that you can't dress up as a black person. Yet I think we all agree that blackface is completely wrong.
I think blackface perhaps has a unique history, whereas perhaps wearing different clothing...
Would you dress up as an Orthodox Jew, for example?
That's a very interesting point. I wouldn't.
I wouldn't either. But why not?
Well, that's a very interesting point, and I think it would take time to ponder. Would you wear a kimono, have a baseball bat and beat a fox in your garden on Boxing Day evening? Now, that's a very niche reference. That's a very... That's a... that's a very interesting point as well. Sorry, as I was going down a rabbit hole about certain famous lawyers. But it's interesting, Justin Trudeau, still the Prime Minister of Canada, won an election not that long ago after pictures of him in blackface surfaced.
Is that a recognition that times do change. And you talk about younger people policing older people. That
Don't like it.
But that is probably partly, and we're going to talk about veganism later, I think, but that's probably partly how society does change, doesn't it?
Right, well, we're going to get on to that, and we won't have enough time unless we go to Nigel's team. They responded to the article. This was the allegations around this video that we don't know what it contains, but anyway. The following statement. Over the last few years, Nigel has filmed over 4,000 cameo messages for fans and supporters. This includes videos for people's weddings, birthdays, stag do's, in-jokes between friends, and even people who are ill in the hospital. When Nigel first joined Cameo, there was a concerted effort by Remain supporters to hijack the platform to embarrass Nigel by getting him to read out obscure, rude words and in-jokes between friends.
It's widely reported that some of these slipped through the net, as Nigel is a classic boomer dad. In the video, Nigel was asked by a customer on Cameo to read a message they had written for a friend. Had Nigel known the message he was asked to read contained an obscure, offensive word, he would not have made the video.
Well, there we go.
Let's leave that there, because there's another big story today. UK ministers have sparked a battle with the Scottish Nationalist Party by proposing that nuclear reactors in Scotland remain operational, and indeed new ones are formed, because the SNP bans new nuclear power. It's something not many people know. Alice, we've seen polling this week that shows a majority of people in Scotland want new nuclear power stations, but for some reason the SNP continue to ban it.
Is this partly because of their colleagues in coalition, the Green Party? But I think absolutely this stance on nuclear is baffling. I think it's a clean energy resource. It's essential if we're going to reach net zero. And it's bizarre that the SNP are banning it. And it's not, let's not forget, it's not just nuclear energy, it's nuclear weapons as well that the SNP oppose. And I think they should think again about this. Nuclear is the way we're going to get to net zero. It's crucial for...
Do you think Humza might backtrack on this one?
You might not expect this of me, but I think this is one of the difficulties with devolution, because surely our energy policy is United Kingdom relevant and United Kingdom wide. Indeed, our defence policy is UK-wide. So there is a real problem when the devolved government says or thinks and does one thing and the Westminster government wants another. I think this is partly about political point scoring and a row being created by Westminster, by the Tories for political gain. But there's also a fundamental problem here. If the left hand thinks this and the right hand thinks this, we've got to...
Well, I'd love to have a debate about devolution, because I have my suspicions that it's actually may have created more problems than it solved.
Also, what if the UK government wants to build a nuclear power station in England, just north of Berwick-upon-Tweed? Are the Scottish going to sort of cut the power line, say, no, we don't want this power? I mean, yeah, no, I think you raise a really important point. And, of course, we are not just an island when it comes to power. We have got some interconnectors to France. 70% of France's electricity comes from nuclear. One of the reasons they haven't been hit so bad by the energy crisis.
Absolutely. I mean, would that we could build a nuclear power station. We know that the planning and so on bedevils this economy, and it's far too difficult to get anything built at all. So perhaps this is all a bit of a row about nothing.
Can I get a response from you to this mad story, just to finish? Thousands of students at Warwick University forced to go vegan simply because a handful of activists decided. What's going on here?
Classic student politics, isn't it? A few crusties trying to impose their will on others. I mean, when I was at university, the only people involved in student politics were strange nerds, people like you, perhaps, Tom.
I was fighting the strange nerds every step of the way.
And yes, I just think, you know, students have always been this way, but it's an amusing...
I don't think it was a handful. I think it was sort of 700 odd against 500 was my understanding when you actually read the article.
But of those who bothered to vote, most students don't care, and then they suddenly realise their meat's been taken away.
They will care now. If I was... Look, on a personal level, and I'm hypocritical on this, I would be furious if I was told that I wasn't allowed to eat meat. Do we, as a society and as a world, need to move further and further away from mass meat eating? Yes, we do. We've got to take it seriously, not just for the climate, but also for animal welfare.
Well, if we care about animal welfare, we could always do this marvellous new lab-grown meat, which with Brexit freedoms we'll be able to deliver in the United Kingdom, perhaps before any other country on earth. But
these students, you know,
we have
little dictators, aren't they?
We've run to the end of the programme, but to Matthew and to Alice, thank you so much for talking through that eclectic array of stories. Up next, it's Martin Daubney.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It'll stay dry and clear for many through the rest of the day, but it will be feeling very cold, and as a result there are some snow and ice warnings in force for Thursday morning. We're going to be seeing some snow being brought by this cold front along northeastern coasts through the rest of the day and tomorrow, and then some further rain and potentially snow across the southwest later. So as that rain across the southwest moves northwards and bumps into the colder air, it could start to bring some snow to the high ground of Devon and Cornwall. Snow showers across the northeast as well as Northern Ireland will bring a risk of some icy stretches by Thursday morning. Widely though, it's going to be a very cold start to Thursday, as we could be as low as -8 in rural areas of Scotland and northwest England. So a very cold start to the day, but some sunshine to be had in similar areas where we'll see it through today, parts of Northern Ireland and much of northern and western England. In the south though, it will stay cloudier with that rain and potentially hill snow persisting through much of the day. There'll be another cold day, temperatures only reaching 4 or 5 degrees for many of us. Across the far north of Scotland, it's going to be windy, so it will feel chillier up here. And on Friday morning, it will be another very cold start. We could see some freezing fog across southeastern areas, so that will bring a bit of a murky start. There'll be some more sunshine around on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we could see the temperatures finally starting to rise a little.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Right, well, coming up, it is none other than Martin Daubney. Martin, what have you got coming up?
Well, we've got some explosive, fresh lines on the Farage stitch-up. We've been speaking to people close to him, and there's a lot more to it, we think, than meets the eye. ITV, do they have a scheme? Do they have a plan? Is this turning into the biggest political stitch-up since Partygate?
Whoa.
Lots to discuss on the show. Also, something that bothers me is full face masks. Balaclavas, full face coverings. So you see them now. There's a stabbing at KFC. The Hamas masks at protests. They're increasingly being used by thugs and hoodlums. Is it time to change the British law, as they did in Northern Ireland in the 90s, and get rid of these face masks to keep people safe?
Very controversial, though. They've done this in Paris. They've done this in other places. Of course, that covers the burqa as well. Big contention there, perhaps.
That's what we do on the show.
No, we'll look forward to that debate after this.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Acquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to the show, GB News. I'm Martin Daubney. It's 3 o'clock. Loads in the next 3 hours. I'll keep you company. Top story, the Farage racism sting. Things are heating up. We've got some explosive, fresh, inside story revelations on the story that's got you all gripped. Is this turning into the biggest media political stitch-up since Partygate? Stay tuned and you'll find out. Next up, the royal racist. The buck is being pulped in the Netherlands after accidentally leaking the names of the two royal racists. Innocent mistake, cynical media manipulation, or a career-ending lawsuit coming Scobie's way. Stick around for that one. Next,